Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello and a very warm welcome to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. And coming up today, our increasingly unhealthy health service. Waiting lists are up to another record high. Ambulances now taking hours rather than minutes to answer emergency calls. The latest shocking statistics released as nurses prepare for their first ever national strike. They admit it will hit treatment for cancer care. What can the government do to get on top of the problems? We're speaking to the former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell to see if there are any answers. The Prime Minister to meet the Irish Taoiseach Michael Martin ahead of the latest meeting of the British-Irish Council, trying to sort out that Northern Ireland protocol. It comes as Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll be forced to call an election at Stormont in January if power sharing is not back up and running. Is there any solution in sight to the huge problem for the UK, Ireland and the European Commission? And Gareth Southgate set to announce the England squad for the World Cup today at 2 p.m. A news conference to follow. We'll bring you all that live on GB News. Who's in, who's out, and just what chance do we have in that tournament? As ever, we want to hear from you. Who do you think should be in the squad? GB Views at gbnews.uk. Before that, let's get the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 12. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak is meeting leaders of the devolved nations and Irish Premier today for the first time since becoming Prime Minister. He's expected to urge the nations to work together and build a future defined not by division but by unity. Mr Sunak will meet his Irish counterpart Michael Martin and First Ministers Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford at the British-Irish Council Summit in Blackpool. The absence of a power-sharing executive means Northern Ireland won't be represented by any politicians at the talks. Mr Sunak's the first Prime Minister to attend the summit in over a decade. Shadow Secretary for Northern Ireland, Peter Carl, says change is needed.
There's got to be a change of attitude. There's got to be more emphasis on Northern Ireland and the interests of Northern Ireland have got to be put first, not as it has been for years now, neglected and used as a tool to beat a political tool to beat the EU with or other issues.
President Joe Biden says it was a good day for democracy and America after voters cast their final ballots in the US midterm elections. The White House shared video of the president last night congratulating many Democrats who'd won hard-fought races. Control of the Senate still hangs in the balance, but Republicans look set to take the House of Representatives. The results have defied expectations, though, with many experts predicting a red wave of Republican victories. America's top general estimates more than 100,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded since the start of the war in Ukraine. General Mark Milley estimates Kyiv may well have suffered a similar number of casualties. He puts the figure of civilians killed in the war so far at around 40,000. The Kremlin yesterday announced the withdrawal of Russian forces from the strategic southern city of Kherson. President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned against complacency. The Royal College of Nursing is urging the government to take action over pay or face disruption across the country. The union announced its first ever national strike yesterday, with 300,000 members voting in favour of walkouts. It's expected to impact the majority of NHS employers, although emergency care won't be affected. The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland says nurses were recognised for their work during the pandemic, with a 3% pay rise last year.
But the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing, who quote, want 17%. Now, that is a high ask given the economic times that we are in. And so I actually generally think all these things can be solved by dialogue, and it's really important that dialogue continues, because no one wants to see a strike. I'm absolutely sure of that.
The former Chancellor Philip Hammond has told GB News he supports a windfall tax for oil and gas companies. In an exclusive interview with Gloria De Piero, he says he'd be surprised if the current Chancellor fails to extend the windfall tax. Jeremy Hunt will announce his autumn statement next Thursday. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced the tax when he was Chancellor, describing it as a 25% energy profits levy. Lord Hammond says the government will need to raise more tax revenue if it wants to maintain the same level of public service.
Happens, I am broadly in favour of a windfall tax, so long as it's sensibly structured and only tackles the genuinely windfall element, not the cyclical ups and downs that you get in energy markets, because energy companies plan around those cycles of lower profits and higher profits over different periods of years. But where genuine windfalls are earned, I think it is legitimate to tax them.
And you can watch that interview with Lord Hammond speaking to Gloria De Piero in full here on GB News tomorrow at 3:30. A man from Somerset has been sentenced to life in prison for murdering his partner, who died 21 years after he set her on fire. 58-year-old Stephen Craig left Jacqueline Kirk severely disfigured after the attack in Weston-super-Mare back in 1998. Craig had already served 15 years in prison, but was arrested again last year after Kirk died from her injuries in 2019. His sentence carries a minimum of 15 years. Eco-activists blocked the M25 in multiple locations for a fourth day in a row this morning. 5 arrests have been made so far after Just Stop Oil protesters climbed gantries at junctions along the motorway in Essex and Surrey. One lane had been closed for a while earlier, but all lanes between junctions 28 and 29 are now open. And a tube strike is causing disruption across London today, with extremely limited services on the Underground. Members of the RMT and Unite unions are involved in a long-running dispute over jobs and pensions. Passengers are urged to check before they travel, with problems expected to continue into tomorrow morning. A very reduced service is running on the Central, Northern and District lines, with no service on all other lines. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Mark with GB News Live.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. So, the NHS facing disruption on what seems to be an unprecedented scale this winter, with nurses set to stage their first national strike in that row over pay. The walkout could start before Christmas, with chemotherapy appointments and children's services among the treatments expected to be hit. There's already a sharp rise in waiting times for cancer therapy. And the latest overall NHS waiting figures released this morning show an ever-worsening crisis. 7.1 million people now on the waiting lists. Ambulances taking more than an hour to answer emergency calls instead of the expected 18 minutes. And those waiting at A&E for more than 12 hours Well, that figure up another 34% on last month. Can it get any worse? And how can the government make it all better? Well, joining us now, a former Secretary of State for Health, Stephen Dorrell. Mr. Dorrell, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's quite an in-tray for Steve Barclay, the new Health Secretary. First of all, on this issue of the nurses striking, what action would you be taking, given that, of course, a lot of people are saying the 17% figure they've suggested is really not attainable?
Yeah, there's no argument that 17% is a very high number. I agree with that. I think that the danger for ministers in these circumstances is to be seen to be grandstanding rather than engaging, as Chris Heaton-Harris, in fairness, the Northern Ireland Secretary, was saying on the clip you played a few moments ago. He was saying it's important that the talking continues, and I do agree with that. I don't believe there's a nurse within the RCN that actually wants to go on strike. I think that there's a challenge here, both for the RCN leadership, actually, and also for ministers to commit to a search for a settlement that doesn't involve nurses withdrawing labour and clearly making waiting lists and other NHS issues even more pressing than they already are.
Yeah, and what should those talks be about? Because Matthew Taylor, the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation, is saying this is about more than pay, and clearly the nurses are pointing to this. I think it's 47,500 vacancies in nursing staff.
Well, absolutely. There's no point when ministers say, "Oh, it's about more than pay." They're sometimes heard to be saying, making excuses in a sense for trying to avoid the issue of pay. I think it's important in these kind of negotiations that nurses' representatives in the RCN, and more importantly, nurses themselves, see ministers addressing the issue head on. There is an issue about pay, but there has to be other issues on the table as well. And of course, a key element of that is recruiting into the health service sufficient new nurses, either attracting back people who've left the health service or bringing new nursing staff into the health service in order to fill those vacancies. And there's an important caveat on that too, if I may say, which is that you don't solve any problems in the health and care system as a whole if the only thing that the NHS does is to recruit nurses out of social care, which would make the problems in social care even worse and therefore more workload for the health service.
Right. A tricky topic for the Tory government to wrestle with. What should be done on migration in terms of trying to attract foreign staff to come in, some of whom may already have training in other health services?
Well, indeed, and indeed many of whom have experience of having worked in our own NHS. I was interested that Lord Wolfson's reported on the news this morning as saying that in the retail sector, which obviously is a big retailer he's interested in, the government needs to be more flexible in terms of allowing people to come and work in retail. Well, if that's true of allowing people to come and work in retail, for goodness sake, isn't it even more true that there should be flexibility around people who are able and willing to come and work in the health service, of course, with proper qualifications and so forth. So
you do share that view then?
I absolutely do share that view. I left the Tory party as a result of its volte-face on Brexit and so forth. I think that we have not yet worked out how we can earn our living and deliver growth and fulfil our public service obligations and so forth against the background of an immigration policy that frankly doesn't support any of those objectives.
Right. Now, as a former health secretary, looking at these statistics that have come out today, which are pretty frightening, 7.1 million on the waiting list overall, those waiting more than 12 hours in A&E, up 34% on last month. How would you triage the health service for this winter, given the problems that are building up?
Well, and this is where it's of course true. It's about more than simply paying nurses more or paying all NHS staff more. It is also about how you use the resources available to the health service as effectively as possible. And I've already made the point. One of the obvious issues here is the relationship between the NHS and social care. That's often said to be about people being able, the NHS hospitals being able to discharge people into social care. That's a key element of it, for sure. But we need to remember that for every delayed discharge, i.e. somebody who could leave hospital but can't because you can't find place for them in social care, for every delayed discharge, there are 4 avoidable admissions into hospital. If we had properly structured social care, we would reduce the demand both on our GP surgeries and primary care, but also on the hospitals. So it's about thinking of this system as a whole rather than individual bits of it.
Yeah, systemic approach to have a joined-up system, as people have talked about. Mr. Dorrell, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Great pleasure to have you here on GB News and hearing your views. And let's hope it is going to be a rather healthier position for the NHS. Thanks very much indeed. Now to another intractable problem for the government. The Prime Minister attending the British-Irish Council meeting in Blackpool today in the hope that he can find some solution to the continuing crisis over power sharing in Northern Ireland. He'll be meeting the Irish Taoiseach Michael Martin as the Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris has warned he will have to call an election for Stormont by January and cut the pay of the Stormont Assembly members. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, joining us in the studio. Tom, it's a really difficult problem trying to get the protocol sorted out first because of Europe's involvement, and then trying to get Stormont back on track. It's trying to get a sort of dance organised almost.
It certainly is, and there are so many different moving parts. But if we think back to late 2019, when Boris Johnson was newly Prime Minister trying to renegotiate Theresa May's agreement with the European Union, interestingly, it was a meeting between Boris Johnson and the then Taoiseach Leo Varadkar that unstuck that process to some degree. That was a meeting in the Wirral, so another part of northwest England that really played host to something that was then seen as a big unsticking moment to push through those negotiations. Now, optimists might think that today could be a similar moment, having the Prime Minister getting the opportunity to sit down with the Irish Taoiseach and really talking through some of the sticky issues that could then persuade Brussels, because ultimately the United Kingdom doesn't negotiate with Ireland, it negotiates with the European Commission. Well, if Ireland has a suggestion for the European Commission that could move things forward, that could be a big unsticking moment.
Right, because I was going to ask you about who's actually in Blackpool, because Chris Heaton-Harris has said, well, actually, this is all up to James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary. He has to sort this out with the European Commission. So are all the constituent parts there to actually sort this out today?
There will not be a deal in Blackpool today. Today there are lots of different meetings and a lot of mood music being set. Let's not forget, the British-Irish Council isn't, as the name would suggest, just a meeting of the British Prime Minister and the Irish Taoiseach. It's actually a council of the British Isles. So it's Guernsey, Jersey, the Isle of Man, Scotland, Wales, all of these devolved administrations, most of them, of course, within the auspices of the British state, but Ireland separate as well. It was a council formed to have a sort of informal biannual talks of all of these different parts of the governance of these islands. And so there will be lots else on the agenda as well. But just crucially, this in-person meeting between the Prime Minister and the Irish Taoiseach could be that unsticking moment, could agree some things in principle that then get passed on to the negotiators in Brussels that then moves this forward. And that's potentially why we've seen a delay to this process of calling an election in Northern Ireland.
But on that very point, now Chris Heaton-Harris is saying, I think January the 19th, he was saying as a date, we've got to have the elections by then. I mean, the DUP basically saying, well, that's not going to change anything, even if we go ahead with those elections, although Sinn Féin say, well, you know, we'll probably do quite well again in those particular elections. Is it going to muddy the waters even more going back to the ballot box?
Well, it's interesting. There are lots of different groups who think they have something to gain or otherwise from these elections. Clearly, the DUP have drawn a very clear line in the sand. Unless there is movement on the protocol, they are not forming an executive. That's basically as simple as it is.
Still in limbo.
So unless there is some movement on the protocol, it's very hard to see how elections aren't avoided, if not delayed. But I think the fact that they have been delayed rather than gunning forward for another set of elections does mean that there is some optimism around some sort of deal.
We'll see if there's something illuminating in Blackpool. Apologies for that. Anyway, we'll see later. Now, back to politics in Westminster, and despite having cast Gavin Williamson adrift into the political wilderness yesterday, it seems he's still causing the government a major headache, with reports today suggesting it's believed a major security leak may have involved the former minister, Penny Mordaunt, having to take urgent action while she was briefly Defence Secretary to try and cover that up. Well, Williamson was sacked from the job by Theresa May over a previous alleged security breach, and he has denied these latest allegations. Let's speak now to our political reporter, Catherine Foster. And Catherine, he was resigning, he said, because he was proving a distraction. He seems still to be rather distracting for Rishi Sunak.
Yes, indeed. The new Prime Minister really might have hoped, mightn't he, that after Sir Gavin Williamson resigned on Tuesday night, that this might have gone away as an issue, but not a bit of it. Sir Gavin Williamson is facing calls for him to be stripped of his knighthood by the Lib Dems. He is also facing now 3 separate investigations, 2 from the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme, 1 internal Conservative Party investigation over both the comments of Wendy Morton, the WhatsApp messages that were leaked over the weekend, and then, of course, the supposed comments to the unnamed MOD official where he is alleged to have suggested that they slit their throat. So this is not going away anytime soon. Of course, Gavin Williamson has form on being indispensable to Prime Ministers right up until the time that he's not. He was sacked as Defence Secretary back under Theresa May over a supposed security leak to do with Huawei. Then he got rid of as Education Secretary under Boris Johnson not very long ago, and real questions over Rishi Sunak's judgment on bringing him back in the first place.
And this latest suggested leak, I mean, the reports say that Penny Mordaunt even had to consider what they call a D notice, which basically is an instruction to the media not to say anything about it at all.
Yes, it is incredible, isn't it? And we will obviously wait to see how this develops. But of course, as I've said, this is not the first time, if this proves to be the case, that Gavin Williamson has leaked sensitive information which he should not. And so both in terms of this, in terms of national security, and in terms of his behaviour round Westminster, these weaknesses of Gavin Williamson have been known, and more reports today that Rishi Sunak was warned, although he had said specifically about the bullying allegations that he hadn't known any specifics. Reports today that Jake Berry had made it clear that these were to do with bullying and misogyny. So on several fronts now, more and more pressure being heaped upon Sir Gavin, and more questions about why on earth the Prime Minister appointed him in the first place.
And just talking of the Westminster jungle, and of course another certain jungle at the other side of the world, what's being said there about Matt Hancock? I understand there's some reports that MPs are actually trying to vote from Westminster. Just wondering, to taste the various treats available down under, should we say?
There's apparently a number of WhatsApp groups between MPs. Chris Heaton-Harris this morning, Northern Irish Secretary, admitting that many MPs have got the app on their phone ready to vote for Matt Hancock to undergo various horrors in the jungle. Of course, last night he had a deeply unpleasant experience with lots of creepy crawlies, which I think was probably enjoyed by many MPs on both sides. But then again, he is reportedly being paid some £400,000 to undergo these trials, while also, of course, collecting his salary as a constituency MP. We're told that he is available for constituency work. I think you have to be fairly urgent to be contacting him. And of course, we're expecting him to talk a lot about his dyslexia. That's one of the reasons that he gave for why he was going into the jungle, because he could reach more people. No discussion of dyslexia as yet, but of course only one day in. So let's see what happens this evening. But plenty more creepy crawlies from Hancock, I am sure.
Yeah, and Gavin Williamson's tarantula on standby as well, who knows. Catherine, for the moment in Westminster, thanks very much indeed for that. And of course, we'll be following the various antics in Westminster for you. Also coming up, the antics on transport front. Chaos in London. Commuters across the capital facing yet more tube strikes, severe delays for public transport. Deep joy. What's the weather up to? Is that going to cheer us up?
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. It is very mild out there. It's also fairly blustery. Most of us having a dry day, but one or two exceptions, particularly northwest Scotland, where this weather front is still lingering. A very wet day across the far northwest. Low pressure up to the far north, and we're drawing in these southwesterly winds. Strong southwesterly winds, but they're bringing with them a lot of cloud, but also mild air. Now, there's some drizzly conditions for Wales and northwest England. The rain is heavy and persistent, though, across the far northwest and could cause some disruption here. Some brighter skies to the east, but generally it's just grey, windy and very mild. 14, 15, 16 degrees, perhaps 17 in one or two places. It's going to stay very mild overnight. That rain is going to persist across northwest Scotland, and as I said, could cause a bit of disruption. That rain will spread at times into Northern Ireland, perhaps southwest Scotland too. Still some drizzle around for parts of northwest England and Wales, staying very windy and gusty conditions, particularly for southeast Scotland and northeast England. And look at the temperatures. Overnight temperatures generally higher than the average maximum for this time of year. Another very mild and predominantly cloudy day on Friday. Still some drizzle at times over the hills of North Wales, northwest England. Still wet, you'll notice, across parts of western Scotland. And that rain becoming a bit more extensive across Northern Ireland during tomorrow afternoon. Look at these temperatures. If it brightens up, 16, 17, perhaps even 18 degrees Celsius. And another very mild night to come on Friday night and into Saturday. This line of rain will continue to edge southwards. That'll linger into the weekend across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, before pushing back further north and clearing away. Again, for most of England and Wales, the weekend does look dry. Could be quite misty and murky, however, this weekend, because the winds will ease off a touch, and all the while staying very mild.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Latest on the transport strikes coming up shortly. But first, let's reflect that there are around 5.5 million small businesses across the UK. And for many, it allows the business owners to do something they love and then share that with their local community. And the cost of living crisis means many are struggling. So this winter, local markets have been encouraging people to stay small and local. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has been speaking to one artist about his craft.
My business is sort of local poster art, or hyperlocal, because I used to be a journalist, and one of my jobs when I was a journalist was a travel editor, so I used to go all over the world, and I've got a thing about posters. You can get them at Paris, Rome, places like that, the Great Lakes. What you can't get is posters of Urmston, which is a small place in Manchester. So I thought, well, rather than be global, I'll go hyperlocal. My aim is to make people smile with my art. It's got to be visually good as well, but it's also got to make them smile. People are going to shop on Amazon and and other websites, but like my stuff, you can't get it at John Lewis. You know, and same with my other traders. It's stuff that you can't, it's not generic. It's individual, it's different. So yeah, markets are a great resource. It's challenging when it's cold, it's wet, it's windy. You think, oh God, why am I doing this? But on the days when it's sunny and the people are out, it's the most beautiful thing in the world.
Eric Jackson, I should perhaps declare an interest. He was a journalist with me on the sports desk at the Surrey Advertiser many years ago. He's a far better artist than he was a sub-editor, I can tell you that. However, and plenty of his views of Manchester and being a Mancunian there at those local markets. Let's reflect on your views coming in, particularly, of course, about the latest in the health strike and these nurses. Geraint's been in touch with us to say remove the requirements for nurses to have degrees. That would increase the supply immediately. They don't need degrees, although they will argue that they do. Nick saying scrap the Labour Party policy that only allows degree-qualified nurses, so similar point. Foreign nurses do not require those degrees. Why? While Brian says we should stop blaming the government about the current state of the NHS and the ambulance service. We should start holding the very highly paid bosses to account, he says. They're the ones in charge of day-to-day operations, and as far as I'm concerned, the buck stops with them. Keep those views coming in. We want to know whether you think, too, whether England can bring it home for this World Cup. Who do you want to see in that squad later at 2 o'clock? And, of course, let's not forget that Wales are playing. Will Gareth Bale bring anything home for us? Let us know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Let's get an update now on the news headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for including Wales there. It's 12:30, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Some breaking news in the last few minutes. The PCS union has announced around 100,000 civil servants have voted for a national strike over pay, pensions and jobs. We'll bring you more on that story as we get it. Rishi Sunak is meeting leaders of the devolved nations and Irish Premier today for the first time since becoming Prime Minister. He's expected to urge the nations to work together and build a future defined not by division, but by unity. Mr Sunak will meet his Irish counterpart, Micheál Martin, and First Ministers Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford at the British-Irish Council Summit in Blackpool. The absence of a power-sharing executive means Northern Ireland won't be represented by any politicians at the talks. A man from Somerset has been sentenced to life in prison for murdering his partner, who died 21 years ago. 21 years after he set her on fire. 58-year-old Stephen Craig left Jacqueline Kirk severely disfigured after the attack in Weston-super-Mare back in 1998. Craig had already served 15 years in prison, but was arrested again last year after Jacqueline died from her injuries in 2019. The UK has frozen more than £18 billion worth of Russian assets since sanctions were imposed on the country after it invaded Ukraine. The Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation says they're the most severe Russia's ever faced, with more than 1,200 people and more than 120 businesses impacted. And ambulances in England, not including London, took over an hour on average to respond to emergencies last month. That's well above the NHS England target of 18 minutes, whilst response times for urgent calls averaged at over 3 hours. TV online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
So we've got the nurses on strike, we've had the rail strikes. Now it's London's tube system hit by a 24-hour stoppage, disrupting travel for millions of commuters in a long-running dispute over jobs and pensions. Let's get the latest with our London reporter, Alice Porter, joining us at King's Cross, where I guess, Alice, a lot of people will be arriving from the north of England thinking that, all the rail strikes are over and suddenly they can't get anywhere in the capital.
Yes, I think there's a few people who are arriving here at King's Cross and they're getting a bit of a shock. There are people who are coming out of the station and joining this queue of people. We've had this taxi rank which just keeps growing, and there's a lot of people who are having to queue for quite some time before they're able to get a taxi to get around the city. And it's a very similar situation for the buses as well. A lot of people are queuing and their buses are absolutely packed, particularly earlier this morning when it was rush hour. And that's because the entire network is suspended on the London Underground today, and that's going to continue on to mid-morning tomorrow. It's good news, at least, that the Elizabeth Line and London Overground is operating, but they are having some restrictions in place and they are incredibly busy. I was speaking to some commuters this morning as they were trying to get about on their way to work, and this is what they had to say.
I work with children, and it's imperative and important that I get there, and especially for young children, I get there on time. For familiarity and the daily routine. So yes, it's not convenient at all.
It's already been an hour and I have no idea when the next bus is coming either, and they've all been absolutely packed as well, so it's taken half an hour to even find a bus.
Yeah, I think given the news recently about the nurses, teachers, university lecturers, strikes are very much in the air at the moment, aren't they? And I think that's understandable considering the cost of living pressures that you mentioned, but also just a sense that the progress is being made in the support coming out from central government. The economy just seems to be going from crisis to crisis, so I don't think people are seeing a light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, Alice, as we're hearing, they're incredibly frustrating for people, particularly as they may have thought things were being sorted out, of course, because the RMT stoppages with rail, it seems that the talks have been taking place. This is a separate dispute.
Yes, absolutely. This has been an ongoing dispute, really, between the RMT and the TfL, and it's really at the heart of it is issues to do with pensions, and that's because over the last couple of years there's been a massive shortfall in funding for TfL, largely because of the pandemic. Of course, the main way TfL gets their revenue is people taking the tube. That wasn't able to happen during the pandemic, so they've had some huge financial problems. The government bailed them out repeatedly to the cost of billions and billions of pounds. But in result, they sort of effectively said to TfL, we'll give you the money, but you've got to get your own home in order. And as a result of that, they really said you've got to review the very generous pension scheme which TfL operates. So for whatever anyone puts in, they put in 6 times that. It's very, very generous. They've been wanting to keep that. It's not really helped, I guess, that a couple of years ago, the Mayor for London, he commissioned a study looking into the final salary scheme, and it was described by the review as expensive, outdated and in need of modernisation. So it's no surprise that the government is sort of kind of going after that. But of course, understandably, TfL workers want to keep it, particularly in a cost of living crisis when they're working in such an expensive city.
Yeah, indeed, we can understand that. But we're hearing in your Vox Pops about people waiting for those buses. There's going to be even more problems because there's going to be another separate strike for London buses, we hear now.
That's right. We've just had that announced that 1,000 bus drivers will be going on strike, and just in the lead up to Christmas as well. These are bus drivers who work for Abellio, which is working in West London and South London, and they're members of the Unite Union, and they're going to be going on strike, and that's going to be beginning on the 22nd of November. It's going to be sort of staggered on 10 different days on the lead up to Christmas. And I think the real concern here is that a lot of these issues aren't being resolved. I mean, today, this tube strike, this is the 6th tube strike this year alone. And of course, you've alluded there to also we've had ongoing train strikes as well. So I think sadly, there's very much the winter of discontent, which I think this shall be known as, because we've had so many different strikes. I think the real concern is that these issues are ongoing, and there does not seem to be any resolution in place for those who are very much caught up in a number of these strikes.
Yeah, Alice, thanks for updating us there at King's Cross, and with all those commuters waiting patiently behind you. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we were saying that we were expecting the England squad to be announced 2 o'clock onwards. We'll have that live for you here on GB News. But let's not forget Wales, a country traditionally known for its rugby prowess. Unless, of course, we've been playing the All Blacks. But now, a rather different-shaped ball is exciting the Principality. Wales, or Cymru as they might become, have reached the Football World Cup for the first time since 1958. And manager Rob Page says the side's never seen such support.
We've pushed so hard for Belgium last November. We had to get a point, 4 points at the last 2 games to get second place. That's how important we saw it. Winning that game, drawing that game against Belgium, knowing we'd confirmed second spot was really, really important to us. All right, the second one was the luck of the draw, but without our support, we wouldn't have. I believe we wouldn't have qualified. We've got a wonderful group of players and world class, some of them, but we need that leveler, and our level is the environment and the support that we've got and that connection we've got. I've never seen anything like it. I've played for Wales. I've never had a connection like we've got now, and that's Amorohid. That's the bucket hats, that connection that we've got. We're all one family. It's amazing.
Well, our national reporter Paul Hawkins is in Wales to find out how World Cup fever has been affecting grassroots football there.
This is how success inspires. The Wales manager Rob Page opening a new 3G grassroots pitch at this primary school in Penrhyn.
3, 2, 1!
What's so great about football?
The audience and just watching and playing it, to be honest.
Yeah, is it better than rugby or?
Yeah.
Why is it better than rugby?
Rugby's physical. It's less physical.
One at a time.
It's less physical. Yeah. And it's just better.
Yeah.
You have more fun.
More fun than
more
fun.
rugby, you can really hurt yourself.
Tell us about your kid. Your kids are great.
Football mad, and I think this World Cup, the last couple of weeks, the excitement of the World Cup coming up. They can't wait. A lot of young girls have come into loving football.
Yeah. It seems like football's becoming more popular than rugby in Wales.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think what the Welsh FA are doing right now, it's working. They're really working with the communities.
And will you be watching Wales at the World Cup?
Yeah!
And will you be singing songs?
Yeah!
Can you give us a blast of a song?
Keep her more. Keep her more. Na 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 na. Kiefer, Kiefer Moore, Kiefer Moore, Kiefer, Kiefer Moore.
Wales have qualified for 3 of their last 4 major tournaments, and that success has driven the popularity of the game in the country. In fact, in a survey taken in April, football is now the #1 sport in the country, and 40% of children are playing it.
People going to the game, seeing their heroes, seeing the stars play on a national level will just inspire them to continue to play and pick up the game for the first time. It's also helped us develop facilities such as this. The qualification for World Cups and European tournaments has meant there's a windfall into Wales as a result, and we've been able to invest in facilities on the back of that.
And what do you think of this new pitch that's been... What did you play on before?
Muddy and stuff. It was all muddy.
And we've just launched the Cymru Football Foundation, which is a dedicated body for facility investment in Wales. We've launched 2 programmes on the back of that, which will support clubs and organisations to develop their facilities. It's a multi-million-pound investment that we'll hope to announce details specifically around how much very soon.
You're better. Well, what's your prediction for Wales against England?
60-0, to be honest.
60-0?
Yeah.
Is it cricket or football? Wales' first game is against the USA a week on Monday. Paul Hawkins, GB News.
Well, you heard it here first. 50-0 against England. Gareth Bale will have to do a bit of work for that. Now, 2 other matters. And the Grenfell inquiry continues today with closing statements from the lawyers acting for the company responsible for fire safety at Grenfell, the Housing Secretary and the counsel to the inquiry, Richard Millett. Let's go live now to join our national reporter, Ellie Costello, who's outside the inquiry for us. And, Ellie, this is a long-going process, as we've discussed before. What sort of details are we expecting today?
Well, it's been over 5 years since the night of that Grenfell fire on the 14th of June 2017, where 72 people died, not even 2 miles away from where I'm stood now in Kensington, one of the most expensive boroughs in the country. And it was an event that shocked the nation and indeed the world. And since then, there's been a mammoth task into the inquiry as to what happened that night, what started the fire, and most importantly, why it happened. That public inquiry has just drawn to a close, and it's cost the taxpayer £150 million. There's been 300 public hearings, 646 participants, and 320,000 documents have been analysed, just to give you a sense of the scale of this operation. We've heard from a series of lawyers over the past 4 days, their closing statements as to who they think or what they think is to blame for this tragedy. There have been some standout moments over the past 4 days, Mark, that I want to bring with you. First of all, the lawyer for the survivors of the Grenfell Tower disaster said that institutional racism had played a part in this tragedy. He pointed out that 85% of those that died that night were of ethnic minority, and he said that how they were treated before and after the fire was he says racism contributed to the loss of those 72 lives. Now, one other thing that very rarely happens at public inquiries is a public apology, and that's exactly what we got yesterday from the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. They stood up and apologised for their failings. They admitted that they didn't ask enough questions about the cladding that was used to cover the tower that was put on by building control, and it's that cladding, that highly flammable cladding, that helped to spread the flames that killed 72 people. So they admitted yesterday in public that there had been failings, but they also said that they are not wholly to blame. And today we heard an apology from government lawyers, namely Secretary of State for Levelling Up. They say they apologise for their failure to grasp the opportunity to check that the system was working as a whole. They failed to realise that the system was broken and that it might have led to a catastrophe like this. They said they were truly sorry, and that they, most importantly, were looking forward to the inquiry's recommendations.
And in terms of those recommendations that you were indicating, Elliot, because the technical aspect of much of this very important because of these other tower blocks we've got elsewhere with the same sort of cladding.
Yes, exactly. We heard from a member of the public earlier this week on GB News who is living in a flat that is still covered in unsafe, highly flammable cladding, and there are hundreds of tower blocks, mainly situated in Manchester and London, which still have this cladding on them. But the government have said that 94% of those tower blocks do have remedial works that have been started or are already ongoing on those blocks. So it is a work in progress. But part of this inquiry is to publish recommendations to stop something like this ever happening again. Survivors this week, they want to see a number of people held responsible for that tragedy. They want to see justice done. They want to see accountability for what happened that night. But as you say, there are still many residents living in fear up and down the country. They want to know that lessons have been learned from this, that something can be put into place to protect them, perhaps some sort of legislation to ensure that buildings are at a certain level of safety. In a practical sense, the inquiry will have to decide in their report where the balance of blame really lies. And the Metropolitan Police will be looking very closely at this as well to decide whether they want to pursue any criminal proceedings. It is already being looked at by them, but they're saying they're going to wait until the full report is published before they decide whether they should pursue any criminal investigations. So now the inquiry panel, Mark, will go away and work on their report. And Sir Martin Morbeck, the chairman of the inquiry, did just say a few moments ago that the work on the report has already begun and they are hoping to have it published as soon as possible next year. They want to deliver conclusions and recommendations so that nothing like this can ever happen again.
Indeed. Thank you very much for taking us through all that detail, Ellie, and of course we'll see what the inquiry comes up with in terms of the recommendations. Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's return to football with England manager Gareth Southgate announcing his squad at 2 p.m. today. We'll have that live for you here on GB News. But let's now catch up with our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's pretty nippy himself because he's gone all the way from Wales to Burton-on-Trent in the matter of a couple of minutes. Paul, you were updating us on what was happening in Wales, who might well, of course, have that 50-0 victory over England. Who knows? But we're going to get the details on the squad fairly shortly.
Yeah, 2 o'clock they're making the announcement. Look, yeah, that kid was pretty optimistic, wasn't he? A 60-0 win for Wales. We'll have to see about that. But certainly we're waiting for the announcement here from Gareth Southgate. That's coming at 2 o'clock. And it's a 26-man squad, so you want to see at least 2 players for each position. And then there's sort of 4 or 5 that are up for grabs. Now, one of the key questions is who is going to be selected in midfield. Will it be James Maddison, who plays for Leicester? He's been in really good form, but he's only played 34 minutes for England, so he's not very experienced. In defence, England have some injury concerns. Chelsea's Reece James was ruled out yesterday. The question is, will Trent Alexander-Arnold, who plays for Liverpool, make the squad list? He's not been in very good form for England, although he is one of their more experienced performers. And then up front, who is going to play understudy to Harry Kane? Obviously, he'll be picked. He is the captain. He's only 2 goals away from Wayne Rooney's being Wayne Rooney's top goal scorer. But who plays his understudy will also be a key question that we'll hear Gareth Southgate answering at 2 o'clock.
Yeah, and clearly that's the problem. They've got to score the goals. But Marcus Rashford, he's back in form for Manchester United, so he may be featuring. Possibly.
He hasn't played for England since that penalty shootout at the Euro 2020 final last year. He was in terrible form for Manchester United, although he has suffered injuries. But since the start of the season, at the beginning of August, he has picked up some form for United. So whether he gets the nod as well, it will be an interesting one for Gareth Southgate.
OK, for the moment, Paul, thank you for that. Back to you, of course, as we get that squad being announced and we see who's in and out. Thanks very much for the moment. Now, Remembrance Sunday, fast approaching, of course, and the 94th Field of Remembrance opening today at Westminster Abbey. It'll stay open until the 20th of November so that members of the public can pay their respects to all of those who've given their service and lives, in many cases, to the country. Our reporter, Rosie Wright, is there for us now. And, Rosie, clearly this is part of a huge national act of remembering. And for many people, of course, it brings quite personal reminiscences of their family and friends who paid the ultimate sacrifice.
Mark, it does exactly that. I've literally just been speaking to a lady who's got a cross in her hand, trying to find the right regiment so she can plant it. Just take a look behind me in the grounds of Westminster Abbey. There are over 70,000 of crosses, symbols, that people have written their messages, each cross representing someone who lost their life in conflict, in armed services. Let's take a little bit of a closer look. All of them organised by regiment. This is the London Scottish and Liverpool Scottish. And just to give you an idea, look, this one out in front here is in memory of Joseph Price, to all who served at home, so the message says, and abroad, from all countries, and to all who keep us safe. There's many messages like this. In a row behind, we can see a cross that's been left there in memory of a dear uncle. Another one there for Angus McNabb, for a grandfather. It says, I never knew. Well, this is a tradition that's been going on for 94 years. A general at the time said, why don't we use the grounds in Westminster Abbey so that everybody, not just servicemen, but of course them as well, can come and plant a cross in remembrance. Now, earlier, before a service which was visited by the Queen Consort, there was a 2-minute silence, a real moment. Of course, Armistice Day is tomorrow, before we head towards Remembrance Sunday this weekend. A moment just to do that, to remember. Now, I spoke to one of the representatives from the poppy factory to find out what's so significant about this field.
Field of Remembrance has been in being here for 94 years. It is a way of remembering those who've given their lives in conflict and terrorist acts. And it started off in 1928 by the founder of the poppy factory, Mr. George Howson, who very cleverly decided that we needed to have some place to go and remember and to commemorate the people who'd gone before us. And he started off with a couple of minor crosses. You can see them here, the World War I cross and then the Second World War cross. That was just placed in the middle of the ground, and then people came along and planted poppies. That transformed over the years into crosses that people wrote their little inscription and salutation on, and now we have ended up in a situation with 308 plots from a variety of regimental associations, civilian groups. The Royal British Legion have the whole bank of plots along the edge there, and we've been doing it for, as I say, 94 years. This is the 100th year of the poppy factory, so we're really delighted to be doing it once more and keep that tradition going.
And members of the public are doing just that now, coming with their crosses to then plant them here. It is now open, of course, at a very special service at lunchtime when the Queen Consort came. She's been a supporter of the poppy factory for many years, and of course this year will be the very first that the King presides over the Arboretum, and that service on Sunday. It is just a moment right in the centre of the bustle of London for people to take a moment and say, today we will remember.
Indeed, and of course that moment tomorrow, as you say, Armistice Day on the 11th of the 11th, when we'll hold that silence as well. Particularly on the issue of all these strikes, particularly the nurses, with Darren saying the RCN should be ashamed of themselves to put people's lives at risk. They should find a better way. Although we should add the RCN says they will carry on with emergency and critical care cover. As far as the transport strikes goes, Maggie saying, if only 100,000 civil servants strike, would anyone notice? Somebody getting in touch with the football. Can England bring it home? Paul says, I hope football is coming home. They have the same chance as all the rest of the teams. Come on, England. While Tony says, no, because Southgate will not pick players who can score goals. Mark saying, after 50 years of playing, coaching and following football, for the first time ever, I will not be watching this farce of a World Cup. Oh dear. However, maybe many in Wales might be this time round. But keep your views coming in, gbviews at gbnews.uk. You're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Stay with us because more coming up, particularly with that squad being announced, as we say. Latest from Westminster too, the nurses' strike, and all the football to come. Before that, the weather.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. It is very mild out there. It's also fairly blustery. Most of us having a dry day, but one or two exceptions, particularly northwest Scotland, where this weather front is still lingering. A very wet day across the far northwest. Low pressure up to the far north, and we're drawing in these southwesterly winds. Strong southwesterly winds, but they're bringing with them a lot of cloud. but also mild air. Now, there's some drizzly conditions for Wales and northwest England. The rain is heavy and persistent, though, across the far northwest and could cause some disruption here. Some brighter skies to the east, but generally it's just grey, windy and very mild. 14, 15, 16 degrees, perhaps 17 in one or two places. It's going to stay very mild overnight. That rain is going to persist across northwest Scotland and, as I said, could cause a bit of disruption. That rain will spread at times into Northern Ireland, perhaps southwest Scotland too. Still some drizzle around for parts of northwest England and Wales, staying very windy and gusty conditions, particularly for southeast Scotland and northeast England. And look at the temperatures. Overnight temperatures generally higher than the average maxima for this time of year. Another very mild and predominantly cloudy day on Friday. Still some drizzle at times over the hills of North Wales, northwest England. Still wet, you'll notice, across parts of western Scotland. And that rain becoming a bit more extensive across Northern Ireland during tomorrow afternoon. Look at these temperatures. If it brightens up, 16, 17, perhaps even 18 degrees Celsius. And another very mild night to come on Friday night and into Saturday. This line of rain will continue to edge southwards. That'll linger into the weekend across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland before pushing back further north and clearing away. Again, for most of England and Wales, the weekend does look dry. Could be quite misty and murky, however, this weekend because the winds will ease off a touch and all the while staying very mild.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
And welcome back to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst, at 1 o'clock. And coming up today, our increasingly unhealthy health service. Waiting lists up to another record high. Ambulances taking hours rather than minutes to answer their emergency calls. And as nurses prepare for their first ever national strike, the NHS seems to lurch from crisis to crisis. So we're asking a leading health journalist, how can they fix it? And we're talking about the reaction to those elections in the US. Major questions now being asked about whether Donald Trump has blown it. Opponents within his own party circling, we're told. Whisper it quietly, could his bid for the White House now be dead in the water? And in the next hour, Gareth Southgate, set to announce the England squad for the World Cup. News conference at 2:15 to follow. All that live for you here on GB News. Who's in, who's out? And just what chance does England have in the tournament? As ever, we want to hear your views. Get in touch with us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let's get an update now on the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark,
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 1. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak's meeting leaders of the devolved nations and Irish Premier today for the first time since becoming Prime Minister. He's expected to urge the nations to work together and build a future defined not by division but by unity. Mr Sunak's at the British-Irish Council Summit in Blackpool this afternoon, where he's meeting his Irish counterpart Michael Martin and First Ministers Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford. The absence of a power-sharing executive means Northern Ireland won't be represented by any politicians at the talks. Mr Sunak is the first Prime Minister to attend the summit in over a decade. Shadow Secretary for Northern Ireland Peter Kyle says change is needed.
There's got to be a change of attitude. There's got to be more emphasis on Northern Ireland, and the interests of Northern Ireland have got to be put first, not as it has been for years now, neglected and used as a tool to beat a political tool to beat the EU with or other issues.
100,000 civil servants have voted for a national strike over pay, pensions and jobs. The Public and Commercial Services Union says the move means industrial action will take place across a range of services. Workers affected include driving test examiners, border force officials and job centre staff, among others. Well, that as the Royal College of Nursing urges the government to take action over pay or face disruption across the country. The union announced its first ever national strike yesterday, with 300,000 members voting in favour of walkouts. It's expected to impact the majority of NHS employers, although emergency care won't be affected. The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Chris Heaton-Harris, says nurses were recognised for their work during the pandemic, with a 3% pay rise last year.
But the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing, who quote, want 17%. Now, that is a high ask given the economic times that we are in. And so I actually generally think all these things can be solved by dialogue, and it's really important that dialogue continues, because no one wants to see a strike. I'm absolutely sure of that.
Elsewhere, President Joe Biden says it was a good day for democracy and America after voters cast their final ballots in the US midterm elections. The White House shared video of the president last night congratulating many Democrats who'd won hard-fought races. Control of the Senate still hangs in the balance, but Republicans look set to take the House of Representatives. The results have defied expectations, though, with many experts predicting a red wave of Republican victories. And America's top general estimates more than 100,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded since the start of the war in Ukraine. General Mark Milley says Kyiv may well have suffered a similar number of casualties. He puts the figure of civilians killed in the war so far at around 40,000. The Kremlin yesterday announced the withdrawal of Russian forces from the strategic southern city of Kherson. President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned against complacency, though. The former Chancellor Philip Hammond has told GB News he supports a windfall tax for oil and gas companies. In an exclusive interview with Gloria De Piero, he says he'd be surprised if the current Chancellor fails to extend the windfall tax. Jeremy Hunt will announce his autumn statement next Thursday. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced the tax when he was Chancellor, describing it as a 25% energy profits levy. Lord Hammond says the government will need to raise more money if it wants to maintain the same level of public service.
I am broadly in favour of a windfall tax, so long as it's sensibly structured and only tackles the genuinely windfall element, not the cyclical ups and downs that you get in energy markets, because energy companies plan around those cycles of lower profits and higher profits over different periods of years. But where genuine windfalls are earned, I think it is legitimate to tax them.
And you can watch that interview with Lord Hammond in full here on GB News tomorrow at 3:30. A man from Somerset has been sentenced to life for murdering his partner, who died 21 years after he set her on fire. 58-year-old Stephen Craig left Jacqueline Kirk severely disfigured after the attack in Weston-super-Mare back in 1998. Craig had already served 15 years in prison, but was arrested again last year after Jacqueline died from her injuries in 2019. His sentence carries a minimum of 15 years. A tube strike is causing disruption across London today with extremely limited services on the Underground. Members of the RMT and Unite unions are involved in a long-running dispute over jobs and pensions. Passengers are urged to check before they travel, with problems expected to continue into tomorrow morning. A very reduced service is running on the Central, Northern and District lines, with no services on all other lines. And the Queen Consort has commemorated victims of the nation's wars at a ceremony at Westminster Abbey. Camilla laid a cross in the field of remembrance in memory of those who died in past conflicts, with a 2-minute silence observed at 11 this morning. More than 1,000 veterans gathered in the grounds of the Abbey. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Mark.
Rhiannon, thanks very much indeed. We'll be hearing Rhiannon there updating us on the tube strikes. More breaking news coming through on transport problems. We're now being told that train drivers at 12 operating companies are to strike on November the 26th. This is the ASLEF union, which is the train drivers, in their continuing dispute over pay and conditions. Separate, of course, to the RMT. RMT workers, mainly station staff and signallers and others. But this just coming through after we were hearing from the new rail minister, Hugh Merriman, claiming that the government had changed the tone on strikes, which had hit train services. In his first speech since being appointed to his role, Mr Merriman saying the only way you get through industrial action is to talk and not to make a political issue of it. But ASLEF clearly not listening to that. And separately, the RMT, which had been due to strike this week before that was called off, saying that their industrial threat remains very much live and will continue to reballot its members to secure a fresh mandate for action, with that result due on November the 15th. So asked if he was planned to meet those union leaders, Mr Merriman telling the Railway Industry Association conference that negotiations between Network Rail, the train operators and the unions were carrying on, and the government was standing by, willing to aid in any particular way. Tom is with us here in the studio. This winter of discontent we've spoken of, with the nurses now having declared their action. Seemingly, the transport issues still very much live. Perhaps we thought there was, some kind of breakthrough with the strikes having been called off for this week.
Well, exactly. And Hugh Merriman, who's been a transport minister for all of the last week and a half, seemed to have thought so as well. Of course, he was chairman of the Transport Committee beforehand, but his language had been that of sort of reconciliation, saying that there was a way through. And of course, the cancellation of those strikes over at the start of the week and indeed at the weekend, it did look like there was progress being made. However, this news today obviously does throw question marks over that progress and whether or not there is a deal to be done here. Yeah, just reading a Department of Transport spokesman saying that letters have been sent to the General Secretaries of all the major rail unions, including the RMT, inviting them to what they call an introductory meeting with Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary. And this has been part of the problem, it seems, is that the operating companies separately were trying to talk to the unions, with the government, particularly under Grant Shapps, actually sitting back or standing back. Yes, and Grant Shapps would always say, well, it's not for me as a government minister to get involved, to stick my nose in these discussions. His successor, briefly though she was, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who was Transport Minister. Oh, yes, we remember her as well, yeah. Under Liz Truss for all of 46 days. She tried to do a very different thing. She met with the rail unions in her first couple of weeks in the job and really tried this sort of more warm approach. And it does seem like that approach is one that is being continued under Mark Harper. But I have to say, talking through all these three separate Secretaries of State for Transport that we've had over the past 3 months, it is easy to see how there hasn't been that continuity and progress.
And there is a particular issue on ASLEF, which is the latest on, we're getting an announcement, the train drivers. Because of course, we had all this publicity saying, well, actually, some of these train drivers are earning 60,000 and more. How can they ask for yet more money when clearly others in the public sector, or particularly nurses, are struggling on £25,000?
Yes, it is really important to note that particularly train drivers, not just the base salary, which many people would see is particularly high, but also because of all of the conditions in their contracts, if they have to work a Sunday, God forbid, or anything else.
Spanish practices, they're called, aren't they?
Suddenly that pay goes up very, very high. You can see many train drivers easily approaching six figures, which many people would be asking, well, why would we be prioritising hiking money in that area when there are others clearly more in need? However, the train drivers' unions and indeed trade operators' unions are very strong, traditionally very willing to strike, and perhaps one of the reasons why their wages are so much higher than in other sectors in the first place is because they have been a fairly militant sector when it comes to union action.
Indeed. Tom, stay with us. We're going to talk about other issues because there's a bit more breaking news coming through now with the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, to meet Pat Cullen, the boss of the Royal College of Nursing today, we're being told. Mr Barclay had criticised the RCN's demands yesterday as not negotiating on pay, in particular when they said they wanted a 17% increase. But it does appear that there may be some effort now to get some kind of discussion going on that. The NHS, of course, appearing to be facing disruption on an unprecedented scale, with the nurses set to stage their first national strike in that row over pay. Well, the walkout, we were told, could start before Christmas, with chemotherapy appointments and children's services being among the treatments expected to be hit. Already a sharp rise in waiting times for cancer therapies. And the latest overall NHS waiting figures released this morning showing an ever-worsening crisis in the health service. 7.1 million people now on the waiting list. Ambulances taking more than an hour to answer emergency calls instead of the expected 18 minutes. And those waiting at A&E for more than 12 hours, up another 34% in just 1 month. Can it get any worse, and how can the government make these things better? Well, we spoke to a former Health Secretary, Stephen Dorrell, earlier. Here's what he had to say to us.
I think that the danger for ministers in these circumstances is to be seen to be grandstanding rather than engaging, as Chris Heaton-Harris, in fairness, the Northern Ireland Secretary, was saying on the clip you played a few moments ago. He was saying it's important that the talking continues, and I do agree with that. I don't believe there's a nurse within the RCN that actually wants to go on strike. I think that there's a challenge here, both for the RCN leadership, actually, and also for ministers to commit to a search for a settlement that doesn't involve nurses withdrawing labour and clearly making waiting lists and other NHS issues even more pressing than they already are.
Yeah, and what should those talks be about? Because Matthew Taylor, the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation, is saying this is about more than pay, and clearly the nurses are pointing to this. I think it's 47,500 vacancies in nursing staff.
Well, absolutely. There's no point when ministers say, "Oh, it's about more than pay." They're sometimes heard to be saying, making excuses in a sense for trying to avoid the issue of pay. I think it's important in these kind of negotiations that nurses' representatives in the RCN, and more importantly, nurses themselves, see ministers addressing the issue head on. There is an issue about pay, but there has to be other issues on the table as well. And of course, a key element of that is recruiting into the health service sufficient new nurses, either attracting back people who've left the health service or bringing new nursing staff into the health service in order to fill those vacancies. And there's an important caveat on that too, if I may say, which is that you don't solve any problems in the health and care system as a whole if the only thing that the NHS does is to recruit nurses out of social care, which would make the problems in social care even worse and therefore more workload for the health service.
Stephen Dorrell, former Health Secretary, speaking to us a little earlier. Well, let's now speak to Lucy Johnson, who's Health Editor at the Sunday Express. Lucy, thanks for joining us once more. I'll just give you this news we're getting through from the Secretary, Health Secretary Steve Barclay, saying he will meet Pat Cullen, the boss of the Royal College of Nursing, today to try and get some kind of deal going. Basically, we're being told he's not going to negotiate on pay, according to sources. Instead, it's understood he'll discuss with her how nurses' working conditions can be improved this winter. That's unlikely to cut it, is it?
I think so. It is a worry. I mean, I have every sympathy for the nurses, and of course, if their costs aren't covering even food and they're eating leftover food and going to food banks and can't afford to drive to work, they do need to have more money. I think that the timing of this is a real concern. We're coming into winter and we've already seen a surge in not coronavirus, but other respiratory viruses, which are coming on. That coronavirus isn't the only threat. So influenza, rhinovirus, adenoviruses, RSV, which is a virus particularly hits children. And we know that there has been an increase even compared to last year with these viruses, which is believed to be because of the immune debt that we have because of the lockdown. Viruses don't just go away, but we've got, more susceptible pool of population. So we are in real trouble coming into winter. And if the nurses could have perhaps done some effective campaigning to increase their pay over a period, perhaps it wouldn't hit patients so hard. Although, having said that, I absolutely get why they don't want to strike. Yeah. They would never want to harm any patient.
But is it really the right negotiating ploy at the moment to go in and ask for 17%? Mr Barclay's indicated that could cost the government £9 billion when people are facing this problem of actually making ends meet, saying the government literally can't afford that.
Well, I mean, I'm no economist, and we have easily spent money quite quickly, haven't we, on other things with low value, such as the test and trace. Many of the COVID measures, we just chucked out money, 37 billion lost to COVID fraud. But, this isn't about COVID. I think this is probably not. I mean, it's going to be a stalemate, isn't it? Those nurses are demanding that. But I think perhaps some kind of compromise, seeing an increase of a certain amount over 2 years, for example, might cut it. It is possible that this is not going to work. But the effect on the health system, which, as you've said, is already in absolute crisis, is going to be enormous. And coming into winter, it's I can't imagine what the consequences will be. We all know we've already got thousands of excess deaths, over 1,000 excess non-COVID deaths every week. So and people will waiting, as you say, 7.1 record numbers on the waiting list. So it's only going to make that worse.
And the possibility of a flu epidemic, bearing in mind what's happened in Australia, of course. But at least talks going on, it seems, so we'll see what emerges from that. Lucy, for the moment, thanks very much for joining us here on GB News Live. Now, the Prime Minister attending the British-Irish Council meeting in Blackpool, of all places, today, in the hope that he can find some solutions to the continuing crisis over power sharing in Northern Ireland. He'll be meeting the Irish Taoiseach Michael Martin, as the Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris has warned he will have to call an election for Stormont in January and cut the pay of the Stormont Assembly members too. Let's get more with our political correspondent Tom Harwood, still in the studio with us here. And clearly, we were talking earlier about the sort of the dance they'll have to do to get all these pieces to fit, because clearly Europe is involved as well in terms of getting the Northern Ireland Protocol sorted out. And Chris Heaton-Harris saying, well, actually, this is up to the Foreign Secretary to get a lot of this sorted out.
Exactly. There are going to be no big solutions today, but what there might be is a shift in the mood music and perhaps some side agreements that may well move things when it comes to the real decision-making, which goes on, of course, in Brussels.
Yeah.
So ultimately, this meeting today, where the Prime Minister will, for the first time, properly sit down with the Irish Taoiseach. They did meet briefly in Sharm el-Sheikh at the start of the week, but not to do any serious policy discussions. It's interesting, there's a sort of parallel that could perhaps be drawn between another sort of seaside northwest town in England, where back in 2019, the then Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, met with Boris Johnson, new as Prime Minister, where they thrashed out a deal over how to change Theresa May's original EU exit agreement. Now, that then moved everything, and a couple of weeks after that, the EU then presented this changed, this reformed deal that was acceptable to Parliament and let the United Kingdom leave the EU. Sometimes these side agreements, these meetings, these non-formal bits of negotiation can be the key to unlock something bigger. So no, not expecting any big grand announcement today. However, it could be a very, very important cog in the whole process.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Stormont still at a standstill, and both sides, the DUP and Sinn Féin, indicating, well, even if we go back to the ballot box in January, it's unlikely to change the situation any.
There are meant to be 9 heads of government at the British-Irish Council meeting. It's really a council of the British Isles, so it's not just Ireland and the United Kingdom, but also the 2 heads of government of Northern Ireland, the First Minister of Scotland, the First Minister of Wales, the heads of Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man as well. However, it's not 9 meeting today. It's only 7, because the 2 people who are supposed to represent the executive of Northern Ireland are not in post. There is no First Minister or Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland as things stand. And that is a very obvious absence in the meeting. And that is ultimately what the whole of the focus of the conversation will be on. But as the DUP have repeatedly said, the second largest party in Stormont now, they have repeatedly said they will not join an executive until the protocol is sorted out. And that's ultimately what it gets down to.
Tom, as ever, thank you very much indeed for taking us through all the complications. And we'll update you, of course, on what happens in Blackpool. But let's return now to the Gavin Williamson issue, still rumbling on in Westminster. Reports circulating today, indeed, that while Defence Secretary, for a very short time, Penny Mordaunt was forced to deal with a security leak in the department believed to come from her predecessor. Yes, Gavin Williamson. Well, he's denied those allegations. But let's speak to our political reporter, Catherine Foster, in Westminster for us. And clearly he resigned because he said he was a distraction. He's still being a distraction, it seems.
He really is. Another day, another serious allegation about Sir Gavin Williamson. You have to wonder as well whether he will ultimately be able to retain the title Sir when all this is said and done. So today, this is regarding a supposed security leak during the time that Penny Mordaunt was Defence Secretary between May and July 2019. She, of course, replaced Gavin Williamson as Defence Secretary. He was sacked over an alleged security leak concerning the Chinese tech company Huawei. Now, he categorically denied that at the time, even apparently swore on his children's lives that it was not true. But now reports that Penny Mordaunt had to come along and deal with another very serious security leak that sources say could only have come from Gavin Williamson, and was so serious that at one point she considered applying for a Schedule D notice, which would basically have enforced a media blackout on this because it potentially put people's lives at risk. Now, Gavin Williamson's spokesperson has said that this is categorically untrue, but it certainly adds to the pressures upon him, and indeed the questions about why the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak appointed him as Minister in the Cabinet Office, Minister without portfolio in the first place, because aside from the bullying allegations that were revealed over the weekend, Gavin Williamson had form. Of course, he was sacked, as we've just said, by Theresa May as Defence Secretary. He was then got rid of by Boris Johnson for being a rather inept Education Secretary. And he's known by many people in Westminster as to be a master of the dark arts and to have operated as Chief Whip with a combination of carrots and sticks, but rather more sticks than carrots. And now there are 3 investigations into him as regards bullying. The Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme investigating the claims about the texts sent to the then Chief Whip Wendy Morton, and also the revelations that followed a day or two later about the unnamed Ministry of Defence official who Gavin Williamson apparently told to slit their throat.
And on that note, Catherine, thank you very much indeed. We'll catch up with you a little later. That's politics in Westminster. What about politics in the States? Coming up here on GB News Live, we'll have the latest on the US midterm results. Is Donald Trump now a busted flush? All that coming up after the break.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Are authorities, are communities doing all they can to combat violent crime? With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Now, the US has been going to the polls for the first time since President Biden was elected as president back in 2020. Well, the results of the midterm still coming in, but it's looking as if the Republican Party are edging towards taking the House of Representatives, the lower house. They've currently got 210 seats, requiring 218 for a majority. However, it's not been the Republican wave expected, and the Democrats have flipped Pennsylvania in the Senate. The Senate's still up for grabs. Well, let's now speak to Jan Halper-Hayes, European advisor to Donald Trump's 2020 campaign and a former worldwide vice president for Republican Overseas. Jan, thanks very much indeed for joining us. And the big question being asked by many pundits is the Republicans' poor showing, as some are saying, really calling into question Donald Trump's run for the presidency for 2024?
I think it would be really nice if the focus went off of Donald Trump and we really looked at what the Republicans did wrong in the midterm and right, and what the Democrats did right and maybe did wrong. But we underestimated the Democrats based on abortion, and we didn't take Joe Biden's, the democracy is on the ballot. We didn't take it seriously enough. And it was the Gen Zs that actually came out and to the rescue of the Democrat Party in the blue states. But what we also have to look at, and what we cared about, we ousted the most powerful, other than Nancy Pelosi, Sean Mahoney, the congressman who ran the Democrat National Congressional Committee. We're doing very, very well in terms of the Senate. And in terms of the getting to 218, I have a feeling we're going to get to 224, 225 in the House.
But clearly, if you don't get the Senate, then Biden's still got some political manoeuvring room. But the other aspect to pick up on why the Republicans didn't get this red wave, I mean, suggestions that Trump choosing the candidates in many areas and the narrative about the election being stolen, that turned a lot of Republican voters off.
Well, I think more that this red wave was erroneously hyped. I think what really we looked at were who were the America First candidates, or MAGA, and he only supported those. I think what we really looked at is that there are, I'll give you, General Baldock in New Hampshire made a terrible mistake in the middle of his campaign, because then he went against Donald Trump and then said he thought it had been stolen, but now he doesn't think it's stolen.
Okay.
That was just a foolish move for him to do.
I'm just going to hold up the front page of the Times now, and it's got a certain picture of a very happy, smiling Ron DeSantis with his daughter in Florida with a really good victory there, and indications for some in the Republican Party maybe that he is the new darling to go ahead to 2024.
Oh, well, look, the media manufactured the hate for Trump, and the media is going to manufacture the love for DeSantis. It's 2 years out, and they need to have someone they hate, and they need to have someone they love. But we cannot just jump to conclusions like that so quickly, because if you look at the polls, DeSantis is at 10%, and Trump is at 84%.
Right. OK, so another 2 years of manoeuvring to go, and clearly we might be in a very different position by 2024. Jan, thank you very much indeed for joining us with your analysis of what's still underway, of course. Georgia yet to return. Thanks very much indeed. Now, you're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst, and we've been discussing those tube strikes affecting London today. Now, of course, we've got the bus drivers in London to walk out for 10 days over pay, and now another train strike on the way. Let's try and cheer ourselves up with the England squad announcement coming up. First, though, an update on the news headlines with Brianna.
Mark, thank you. It's coming up to 1:34, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak is meeting leaders of the devolved nations and Irish Premier this afternoon for the first time since becoming Prime Minister. He's expected to urge the nations to work together and build a future defined not by division, but by unity. Mr Sunak's at the British-Irish Council Summit in Blackpool, where he's meeting his Irish counterpart Michael Martin and First Ministers Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford. The absence of a power-sharing executive means Northern Ireland won't be represented by any politicians at the talks. Well, Downing Street says the Prime Minister has spoken to Ukraine's president, reiterating the UK's unwavering support for the country. Rishi Sunak this morning reassured Volodymyr Zelensky that the UK would continue providing military aid, including more than 25,000 extreme weather kits for troops. It follows yesterday's withdrawal of Russian troops from the strategic southern city of Kherson. A man from Somerset has been sentenced to life in prison for murdering his partner, who died 21 years after he set her on fire. 58-year-old Stephen Craig left Jacqueline Kirk severely disfigured after the attack in Weston-super-Mare back in 1998. Craig had already served 15 years in prison, but was arrested again last year after Jacqueline died from her injuries in 2019. 100,000 civil servants have voted for a national strike over pay, pensions and jobs. The Public and Commercial Services Union says the move means industrial action will take place across a range of services. Workers affected include driving test examiners, border force officials and job centre staff. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark will be back in just a moment.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live here with Mark Longhurst. Perhaps we ought to name it the GB News Strike Desk because yet more problems coming up in the past few minutes, being announced that drivers at the 12 train companies operating countries walking out in their dispute over pay. This is ASLEF, the train drivers, as opposed to RMT, who were supposed to be holding their train strike this week. Of course, they are station staff and signallers and other associated roles. And earlier, of course, being announced that 1,000 bus drivers in London to stage a series of strikes over pay coming up. Well, today it's the tube system in London hit by a 24-hour walkout, disrupting travel for millions of commuters in their long-running dispute over jobs and pensions. Let's get the latest with our London reporter Alice Porter, who's at King's Cross. And Alice, we were discussing, of course, many people will be arriving there at King's Cross to get to the capital, thinking that the rail strikes are all sorted this week, and suddenly they can't get anywhere else in London.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's been a number of very disappointed passengers who've got off the train, who've arrived at King's Cross, particularly some tourists who perhaps weren't so clued up on what was going on in London, and they've been sorely disappointed. There have been enormous queues at taxi ranks. The buses have been absolutely packed to capacity because on London Underground there's almost no services operating across today. The London Overground and Elizabeth Line services are still operating, but because of so many people on those services, it's still going to be incredibly difficult for many people to get around the city.
And I'm just looking at the latest that we've got now another walkout on the trains 26th of November. ASLEF has just been talking, the General Secretary, Mick Whelan. We regret passengers will be inconvenienced for another day. We don't want to be taking this action, but withdrawing our labour is always a last resort. Basically, he's saying that industry has not made another offer due to what he called a dodgy deal they signed with the Department of Transport. And again, a lot of people are thinking with the RMT action actually being suspended for this week, maybe things were getting better.
I know, I think that's in some ways is the sort of extra tragedy. I mean, I can't believe even in the last hour that we've spoken, we've had yet another strike, and that was from ASLEF Union, which represents all the train drivers, and they're saying that drivers at 12 of operators will be going on strike on the 26th of November, and it's just after we were meant to have strikes called off on our rail services. That was the RMT Union, which were going to have strikes which were going to be taking place all the way up till yesterday. That was called off. We had 3 3 days of strikes planned. That was called off, which maybe made some passengers have a little sense of ease that maybe things were getting better, but absolutely the case is that they are not. And of course, this is very difficult for so many people involved, particularly commuters who are getting caught up in that. I was speaking to some people in London today who are queuing for buses, and this is what they had to say.
I work with children, and it's imperative and important that I get there, and especially for young children, I get there on time for familiarity and the daily routine. So yes, it's not convenient at all.
It's already been an hour and I have no idea when the next bus is coming either, and they've all been absolutely packed as well, so it's taken half an hour to even find a bus.
Yeah, I think given the news recently about the nurses, teachers, university lecturers, strikes are very much in the air at the moment, aren't they? And I think that's understandable considering the cost of living pressures that you mentioned, but also just a sense that the progress is being made in the support coming out from central government. The economy just seems to be going from crisis to crisis, so I don't think people are seeing a light at the end of the tunnel.
And Alice, those queuing there for the buses as you were talking to them, they're going to have to queue for a bit longer, it seems, because yet another strike now on London buses.
Yes, that's right, and that's due to be starting 10 days of strike action on the 22nd of November, and that's people, the drivers, about 1,000 drivers who are represented by Unite Union, and they're working for the bus company Abellio, and that's basically mostly based in South London and West London. They're going to be doing 10 days of strikes in the lead up to Christmas, so I suppose that's going to add an extra dimension to all these strikes, as people are going to be more than ever wanting to go out and do their Christmas shopping. It's obviously something we weren't able to do so easily last year, particularly in the capital, when, if we all take our minds back to last year, Omicron was really in its force in the capital. And so this year it's going to really disrupt people who are trying to not only get to work, but are also wanting to do their Christmas shopping. And so if we look at all these strikes, we take a step back, we've got, more train driver strikes. Well, that's going to affect the whole of the country. But of course, so many, I'm standing outside King's Cross right now, so many trains begin and finish here in King's Cross, and that's going to have an enormous impact, not just in the capital, but across the whole country. We've got bus strikes as well, and this is the 6th tube strike this year, and there's no sense that that issue that there's ongoing with pensions is going to be coming to conclusion anytime soon. And I think it is particularly damaging in the capital. I mean, of course, for any commuter, any part of the country, it's an absolute pain in the neck when you can't get to work. But when you look at this in terms of how this is going to impact the London economy, this could have it continues to have a really devastating consequences. And remember, this is only a year, 2 years on from the pandemic, when particularly the nighttime economy was trying to get sort of back on its feet, and many sort of shops are desperate to try and have people coming into their shops. I mean, I was actually in Uxbridge just last week, just speaking to people, sort of shop owners, and they were saying that these strikes are having an impact on footfall, which is making it really difficult for shops who are keen to sell to people just before Christmas, but with these ongoing strikes, they absolutely can't.
Yeah, we'll all be asking Father Christmas for a bicycle this year, I think. At King's Cross, Alice, thank you very much indeed for updating us. Now, let's reflect on sport, with Wales, a country traditionally known for rugby, of course, reaching the Football World Cup, though, for the first time since 1958. And that's seen a surge in football's popularity in the Principality. The team's manager saying that his side's never had the support it's seeing now.
We've pushed so hard for Belgium last November. We had to get a point, 4 points at the last 2 games to get second place. That's how important we saw it. Winning that game, drawing that game against Belgium, knowing we'd confirmed second spot was really important to us. All right, the second one was the luck of the draw, but without our support, we wouldn't have. I believe we wouldn't have qualified. We've got a wonderful group of players, and world class, some of them, but we need that leveler, and our level is the environment and the support that we've got and that connection we've got. I've never seen anything like it. I've played for Wales. I've never had a connection like we've got now, and that's Amorohid. That's the bucket hats, that connection that we've got. We're all one family. It's amazing.
Well, our national reporter Paul Hawkins has been in Wales to find out how it's affecting grassroots football there.
This is how success inspires. The Wales manager Rob Page opening a new 3G grassroots pitch at this primary school in Penrhyn.
3, 2, 1, go!
What's so great about football?
Playing the audience and just watching and playing it, to be honest.
Yeah, is it better than rugby or?
Yeah.
Why is it better than rugby?
Rugby's physical. It's less physical.
One at a time.
It's less physical. And it's just better.
Yeah.
You have more fun.
More fun than more fun.
Rugby, you can really hurt yourself.
Tell us about your kid. Your kids are great.
Football mad, and I think this World Cup, the last couple of weeks, are the excitement of the World Cup coming up. They can't wait. A lot of young girls have come into loving football.
Yeah. It seems like football's becoming more popular than rugby in Wales.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think what the Welsh FA are doing right now, it's working. They're really working with the communities.
And will you be watching Wales at the World Cup?
Yeah!
And will you be singing songs?
Yeah!
Can you give us a blast of a song?
Keep her more. Keep her more. Na 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 na. Keep her more. Keep her more.
Wales have qualified for 3 of their last 4 major tournaments, and that success has driven the popularity of the game in the country. In fact, in a survey taken in April, football is now the #1 sport in the country, and 40% of children are playing it.
People go into the game seeing their heroes, seeing the stars play on a national level will just inspire them to continue to play and pick up the game for the first time. It's also helped us develop facilities such as this. The qualification for World Cups and European tournaments has meant there's a windfall into Wales as a result, and we've been able to invest in facilities on the back of that.
And what do you think of this new pitch that's been What did you play on before?
Muddy and stuff. It was all muddy.
And we've just launched the Cymru Football Foundation, which is a dedicated body for facility investment in Wales. We've launched 2 programmes on the back of that, which will support clubs and organisations to develop their facilities. It's a multi-million-pound investment that we'll hope to announce details specifically around how much very soon.
You're better. Well, what's your prediction for Wales against England?
60-0, to be honest.
60-0?
Yeah.
Is it cricket or football? Wales' first game is against the USA a week on Monday. Paul Hawkins, GB News.
Well, more from Paul in a moment on the England squad about to be announced in about 10 minutes' time. But let's update you on the situation on the nurses' strike. And the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has said that his meeting with the General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, has been constructive. He's issued a tweet to say, constructive meeting with the RCN covering a number of topics. Nurses do an incredible job. I regret some union members have voted for strikes. My priority is to keep patients safe and to minimise disruption. My door is open and we have agreed to meet again shortly. But for Pat Cullen, she did not say anything apparently to reporters after she left the meeting with Health Secretary Mr Barclay in Whitehall. She was asked how the talks had gone by those reporters and if Mr Barclay had been receptive. She said nothing, stepping into the back seat of a chauffeured car, we're being told. So clearly indications that talks have been taking place and might continue as well. We'll update you as we get more. But let's head back to that football now. As we said, England manager Gareth Southgate to announce his squad at 2 o'clock. Let's head back to Paul Hawkins, our national news reporter, who's magically made it from Wales to Burton-on-Trent, where that announcement is about to be made. Any indications as to who's in and who's out, Paul?
Yeah, speaking of strikers, I'm just reading some speculation that Callum Wilson, Newcastle forward Callum Wilson, who scored 6 in 10 Premier League goals, has been included in the squad. But it is just speculation. Look, we're 10 minutes away from England releasing the squad on their social media channels. And then we'll have that press conference just behind our camera position at 2:15. Gareth Southgate answering questions from the assembled media, a lot of them who are on this balcony at the moment. So you may pick that up on the microphone. But look, the big questions really are, will Callum Wilson be included in the forward line? We know Harry Kane will definitely be on the plane, but who will he pick as an understudy to Harry Kane? Also, will Leicester's James Maddison be included? He plays in midfield for Leicester. He's had a really good season so far, been involved in a lot of their goals, although he only has 34 minutes experience playing for England. And then a lot of question marks over who he takes in defence. Now, Trent Alexander-Arnold, been very poor for Liverpool this season. We know Chelsea's Reece James has been excluded because of injury. That only broke yesterday. And then, of course, Kyle Walker as well is recovering from a groin injury. Manchester City's Kyle Walker. So lots of question marks over defence. Will James Maddison make the plane in midfield? And then who will he pick as an understudy to Harry Kane? We'll find out in less than 10 minutes' time.
OK, we'll let you get in position to get all the latest news for us for the moment. Paul, thank you very much indeed. But let's speak now to sports journalist Ben Jacobs on who might be making that team. And, Ben, we were just talking to Paul there about James Maddison. 22 goals and assists for Leicester. But he does seem to be not in favour with Gareth Southgate. And a lot of people hoping that he is going to make the squad.
Yes, and James Maddison will make the squad, as I understand it, talking to sources in the last 15 minutes or so. Maddison has scored 6 goals and 4 assists this season, and that's impossible for Gareth Southgate to ignore. Of course, he was omitted from the last round of call-ups, and as you rightly say, hasn't been in favour. But Southgate, with this call, is going for form, and Maddison is in, as is Callum Wilson as well. In fact, I think 25 of the 26 are pretty well known now, and that actually makes it quite intriguing because there's either room for another defender or another midfielder. So keep an eye out for names at 2 o'clock, either Conor Gallagher, Ruben Loftus-Cheek as well, and Tyrone Mings are 3 to look out for that are probably vying for the one space that we don't know. Trent Alexander-Arnold is in there. Kyle Walker is in the squad despite recovering from injury. Newcastle United, who are having a great season, are going to be represented by 3 players in Kieran Trippier in the defensive position, and then Callum Wilson, and of course the goalkeeper Nick Pope. Jordan Pickford is probably going to be England's number 1. But Aaron Ramsdale will obviously be rivaling him, and Pope is in decent form as well. So there's a lot of competition in the goalkeeper spot, but that's pretty much where we stand at the moment. And I suppose the omissions, just to briefly point out, Ivan Toney isn't in there, the Brentford striker. He's had a good season too. And Mark Gahey and Joe Gomez are also not going to be in the squad.
And, of course, we've got to score goals. So much riding on Harry Kane. But a suggestion that Marcus Rashford might be back after improving his form with the Manchester United.
Yeah, Rashford's going to be one of the forwards. Phil Foden, of course, can offer goals as well. Jack Grealish will be in there. Bukayo Saka and Raheem Sterling, an interesting one because he's been playing at wing-back for Chelsea and is out of form, but he makes the squad along with Callum Wilson. So that will alleviate some of the burden on Harry Kane. A little bit worrying from England's point of view because, of course, Antonio Conte said that Kane is feeling tired at the moment, which is not ideal heading into the World Cup only a week away.
OK, well, we'll see the full list fairly shortly. Ben, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for taking us through the sneak preview. Thank you. Now, we've got Remembrance Sunday and, of course, Armistice Day tomorrow approaching, with the 94th Field of Remembrance opening today at Westminster Abbey. It'll remain open, indeed, until the 20th of November, so that members of the public can pay their respects to all of those who've given their service and, indeed, their lives to serve the country. Our reporter, Rosie Wright, is there for us now. And, Rosie, you're updating us some very personal messages on the crosses that people are actually placing there to remember their own family.
Mark, that is exactly the idea. It's the 94th year now that the grounds of Westminster Abbey have been home to a field of remembrance. Lots of people, hundreds, actually thousands of them have come, and the public are open to come now. There's over 70,000 of these symbols all in the grounds, and they're organised by regiment. Now, just to make really clear, each one of these wooden crosses resembles a life that's been lost, and members of the public are invited to come through, pick up one of those symbols. It doesn't have to be a cross, it could be another, a religious symbol, or maybe a symbol of a poppy, leave a message if they like, and then use a mallet and place it in here. Now, people have got some heart-wrenching stories. Earlier, I spoke to Sylvie, who planted 2 crosses.
I come up here every year for the last 6 years, and I plant a cross on the Merchant Navy because my mother, one of her brothers, was in the Merchant Navy, and he was on a ship going to Russia with armaments for Russia, which was blown up, and so he and all the crew died, and their grave is somewhere in the water, sort of thing. So I come and put a cross on for an uncle that I never knew, And then my dad lost a brother fighting in France, and he's buried outside Rouen, and I've actually seen the grave, which is very well kept. But he was in the London Rifles, so he was an army person. But I'm the only one that's near to London, so I come and do it on behalf of my cousins and brother and people who are the relatives that are still here today, but who didn't know these people. But I just feel it's important to come here to know that we are remembering their sacrifice.
Sylvie was remembering people that she'd never met. This here, the Royal British Legion, have got special enclosures here. And this is for people who've fallen in recent conflict. Dad, thank you for all you gave, for all you were. We will always love you. It's a very emotional moment for lots of people today, coming to remember. The Queen Consort was here earlier doing exactly that, holding 2 minutes of silence as we gear up now for Armistice Day tomorrow and then Remembrance Sunday this weekend.
Indeed, Rosie, thank you. Each of those crosses, a life lost, but now a life remembered too. Thank you very much indeed. You're watching GB News Live. Coming up, the announcement of that England squad for the World Cup, who's in, who's out, and Gareth Southgate's news conference too. That live for you here on GB News. Before that, the weather details.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. It is very mild out there. It's also fairly blustery. Most of us having a dry day, but one or two exceptions, particularly northwest Scotland, where this weather front is still lingering. A very wet day across the far northwest. Low pressure up to the far north, and we're drawing in these southwesterly winds. Strong southwesterly winds, but they're bringing with them a lot of cloud, but also mild air. Now, there's some drizzly conditions for Wales and northwest England. The rain is heavy and persistent, though, across the far northwest and could cause some disruption here. Some brighter skies to the east, but generally it's just grey, windy and very mild. 14, 15, 16 degrees, perhaps 17 in one or two places. It's going to stay very mild overnight. That rain is going to persist across northwest Scotland, and as I said, could cause a bit of disruption. That rain will spread at times into Northern Ireland, perhaps southwest Scotland too. Still some drizzle around for parts of northwest England and Wales, staying very windy and gusty conditions, particularly for southeast Scotland and northeast England. And look at the temperatures. Overnight temperatures generally higher than the average maximum for this time of year. Another very mild and predominantly cloudy day on Friday. Still some drizzle at times over the hills of North Wales, northwest England. Still wet, you'll notice, across parts of western Scotland. And that rain becoming a bit more extensive across Northern Ireland during tomorrow afternoon. Look at these temperatures. If it brightens up, 16, 17, perhaps even 18 degrees Celsius. And another very mild night to come on Friday night and into Saturday. This line of rain will continue to edge southwards. That'll linger into the weekend across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, before pushing back further north and clearing away. Again, for most of England and Wales, the weekend it does look dry. Could be quite misty and murky, however, this weekend, because the winds will ease off a touch, and all the while staying very mild.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News. And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky. That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Train drivers at 12 operators are to strike on the 26th of November. Members of ASLEF are involved in a long-running dispute over pay. They're among several rail unions on strike this month, including the RMT and Unite. Meanwhile, a tube strike's causing disruption across London today with limited services on the Underground. Passengers are urged to check before they travel, with problems expected to continue into tomorrow morning. Well, that as the Health Secretary says he's had a constructive meeting with the Royal College of Nursing. Earlier, the union was urging the government to take action over pay or face disruption across the country. Steve Barclay says they've agreed to meet again very soon in order to avoid industrial action. The government says the union's asking for a 17.6% pay boost. Meanwhile, 100,000 civil servants have voted for a national strike over pay, pensions and jobs. The Public and Commercial Services Union says the move means industrial action will take place across a range of services. Workers affected include driving test examiners, border force officials and job centre staff. Downing Street says the Prime Minister has spoken to Ukraine's president, reiterating the UK's unwavering support for the country. Rishi Sunak this morning reassured Volodymyr Zelensky that the UK would continue providing military aid, including more than 25,000 extreme weather kits for troops. It follows Russia's withdrawal yesterday from the strategic southern city of Kherson. Meanwhile, back here, Rishi Sunak is this afternoon meeting leaders of the devolved nations and Irish Premier for the first time since becoming Prime Minister. He's expected to urge the nations to work together and build a future defined not by division but by unity. Mr Sunak's at the British-Irish Council Summit in Blackpool, where he's meeting his Irish counterpart Michael Martin and First Ministers Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford. The absence of a power-sharing executive means Northern Ireland won't be represented by any politicians at the talks. Peter Carl, Shadow Secretary for Northern Ireland, says change is needed.
There's got to be a change of attitude. There's got to be more emphasis on Northern Ireland, and the interests of Northern Ireland have got to be put first, not as it has been for years now, neglected and used as a tool to beat a political tool to beat the EU with or other issues.
In other news, President Joe Biden says it was a good day for democracy and America after voters cast their final ballots in the US midterm elections. The White House shared video of the president last night congratulating many Democrats who'd won hard-fought races. Control of the Senate still hangs in the balance, but Republicans look set to take the House of Representatives. The results, though, have defied expectations, with many experts predicting a red wave of Republican victories. The former Chancellor Philip Hammond has told GB News he supports a windfall tax for oil and gas companies. In an exclusive interview with Gloria De Piero, he says he'd be surprised if the current Chancellor fails to extend the windfall tax. Jeremy Hunt will announce his autumn statement next Thursday. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced the tax when he was Chancellor, describing it as a 25% energy profits levy. Lord Hammond says the government will need to raise more money if it wants to maintain the same level of public service.
Happens, I am broadly in favour of a windfall tax, so long as it's sensibly structured and only tackles the genuinely windfall element. not the cyclical ups and downs that you get in energy markets, because energy companies plan around those cycles of lower profits and higher profits over different periods of years. But where genuine windfalls are earned, I think it is legitimate to tax them.
And you can watch that interview in full here on GB News tomorrow at 3:30. A man from Somerset has been sentenced to life for murdering his partner, who died 21 years after he set her on fire. 58-year-old Stephen Craig left Jacqueline Kirk severely disfigured after the attack in Weston-super-Mare back in 1998. Craig had already served 15 years in prison, but was arrested again last year after Jacqueline died from her injuries in 2019. His sentence carries a minimum of 15 years. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Welcome back to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Now, anybody fancy a game of football? Because in the last few minutes, England manager Gareth Southgate has named that 26-man squad for the World Cup in Qatar. You may want to put your glasses on to actually get that in detail. However, the FA making the announcement on its Twitter feed. We're expecting the details with Gareth Southgate shortly, but we can tell you that the squad in full is Jordan Pickford, Nick Pope and Arsenal's Aaron Ramsey in the three goalkeeping positions. And we've got, in terms of the headlines, James Maddison and Callum Wilson in on the attack side with Harry Kane. Marcus Rashford is back, having been in good form for Manchester United. Grealish as expected. And indications that we've got really, as expected, those people in form. Clearly, there have been injury problems. Ben Chilwell, for instance, with his hamstring, is out. But let's speak to a man who normally brings in his crystal ball, but this time he's got a ballpoint and a piece of paper to actually work out the squad and who's going to be in what position. It's not actually looking too bad, particularly about, up front in terms of scoring goals.
Considering the number of debates in all different areas of the squad, I don't think there are any surprises here, and I don't think we should have expected any, given that it's a 26-man squad. I've never known such conjecture, so many talking points in the build-up to a World Cup squad.
And they kept it under wraps as well, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, for the first time in my memory, I know for a fact last night the FA said to Sky they're not issuing any embargoes prior to the announcement of the squad because they want it to be their own moment.
Because there's been so many leaks previously of this.
Yeah, there have been loads of leaks previously, yeah. I mean, it gets out. I mean, the other thing with that is that led me to think last night that they were preparing to disappoint a lot of players, but they haven't. I mean, everyone I thought who would be in is in. I mean, you look at the notable omissions, you might make a case for Ivan Toney, certainly Ivan Toney in the context of 8 forwards, not getting in there. And maybe it's because of his investigation that he's helping the FA with inquiries over alleged breaches of the betting code with the FA. Tyrone Mings is not in the defensive lineup. 17 caps for England, 14 clean sheets, 2 goals, only 4 conceded. So you'd say there was a decent case for him being in, but again, 9 players. And then you talk about Reece James the other day. Now, Reece James said yesterday, it was a quite pointed press release. He was basically saying, look, I tried everything I could and I was prepared to take the risk of going to Qatar, but clearly the FA didn't feel the same as me. Now, you have to remember the context of this. Gareth Southgate was involved in many a fringe squad in the early 2000s. He saw the damage it caused bringing injured players who weren't up to match fitness, like David Beckham in 2002, like Wayne Rooney in 2006, and they didn't perform at the tournament. So he wants players who are fit.
But we've got Kyle Walker in, who had this groin injury. Questions as to, and he's, 32 years old now? So, I mean, is this a risk bearing in mind? And Wales have got the same problem with Gareth Bale, of course. It's fine for, he's not even made 90 minutes, but, a couple of games. But this is a tournament where they have to go all the way through.
The other thing is, Mark, there's no period for ingratiation, which is why a lot of people felt James Maddison might not play because he's not played for England in 3 years. Yes, his form has been excellent. He's been the outstanding attacking midfielder, certainly ahead of Grealish and Sterling and Foden this season, and in a struggling team, a side that nearly sacked their manager about 6 weeks ago. But there's no ingratiation period. It's 11 days now from this to the day of the squad announcement. It's 11 days until England kick off. That will probably never happen again. So there's no time for 2 friendlies in between to get him off the bench and get him ingratiated. You need self-starters. People are going to hit the ground running.
And there has been this huge debate about the Premier League fixtures going right up to the last moment and the danger, therefore, of people getting crocked before the tournament, which doesn't happen normally in a World Cup.
Nobody was talking about this in the summer, you know that. And what normally the injuries that keep players out of World Cups are bone injuries, they're impact injuries, but they're forgetting the impacts of soft muscle injuries, tissue tears, that kind of thing. And that's done for a few players. I mean, Heung-min Son, it was a facial injury, a cheekbone injury, but he's managed to get himself fit for South Korea. It came too soon it certainly did for Ben Chilwell, and you'd have to say Reece James as well, although he did say, as I said yesterday, that he was going to play. That he was ready to play.
Right, Harry Kane captain, as expected, and of course I think he's only a couple off the Golden Boot record.
He is. He's not far off Wayne Rooney's now. He could even smash that. I mean, there's every opportunity for him to smash that in the group stages. I mean, they've got Iran, USA. The USA aren't the team they were maybe 10 years ago when they had Landon Donovan, that generation of players. And of course, you've got Wales as well.
And the big one, Wales.
Yeah, Wales. That's the last game. I mean, I would like to think England would have 6 points by then. Wales, I think, are well capable of getting out of that group as well. As I say, they're not exactly vintage USA and Iran sides.
Yeah, and Paul was talking to youngsters in Wales, and one of them came up with your seemingly the same crystal ball, 50-0 to Wales over England. However, I mean, let's talk about Wales as well, because they've had these injury problems. And Rob Page saying, well, we don't know if Gareth Bale's going to make it for the full 90 minutes. Aaron Ramsey's obviously had a problem as well. Joe Allen has a hamstring problem.
When it comes, those players there have done it for Wales in the past. You know, you're thinking about Joe Allen. They played in 2016. They were stalwarts of that campaign. Certainly Gareth Bale and Aaron Ramsey. They were the 3 players who were consistently playing in the Premier League.
The international class.
Yeah, you had Ashley Williams back then. Yes, there have been changes. There are a couple of players who are decent young players who the tournament probably came too soon for them. But nonetheless, I do think on the right day, if Gareth Bale has managed himself correctly, and he's been thinking about this since last summer and even before, which is why he didn't come back to the Premier League.
And he has been playing in LA.
He has, but if he comes to the Premier League, even 2 years ago at Tottenham when he was closer to his peak, he wasn't playing every game. I think he still managed to score over 20 goals or 18 goals or something. So if he can repeat that kind of form. And don't forget, he's not going to be playing against Premier League opposition for 2 of those games.
But
in the group stage.
Even though they're playing, I think, late in the evening, there's the question about the heat and the conditions out there. And what's that going to do to the older players?
I don't think the heat is going to be a massive problem. The stadium is going to be air-conditioned and it's going to be temperate. The problem might be in the lead-up or around the stadium, maybe in their training conditions, I don't know.
OK, well, we've got the doors ready to open with a certain Gareth Southgate. Or someone with a face mask just popping in to check if all the reporters are ready for it. We're getting a news conference shortly with Gareth Southgate. What about Southgate himself? I mean, there have been question marks as to whether he's able to lift these teams to get above their sort of quarter-final status. Some have suggested they may reach.
Look, he's done a bit of a Bobby Robson here. Bobby Robson liked tried and trusted players that had delivered for him in tournaments, recent tournaments. So you'd certainly say that Pickford was somebody who previously, and not so much now, but in a couple of seasons ago, he was struggling at club level, but he was still good for England, and therefore Southgate kept faith with him. You look at players like Trippier. He had a drop in form, but went to Atletico Madrid and rebuilt his career. But he still was a stalwart of the 2018 side that got to the semi-finals. Kyle Walker as well. I mean, look, he's not had much. He's been injured but he wants him there because he's relied on him before and he's used him. But then you have other ones like Maddison. Maddison, as I say, hasn't played for England in 3 years, but you can't argue with his form.
22 goals and assists for Leicester City. It's not a bad record.
No, that's not a... Well, no, that's overall, but this season it's 6 in 12 from midfield, and as I say, in a team that's been in the bottom 3 for most of the season and nearly sacked their manager a few weeks ago.
Just a couple of names I'm going to flag up. Raheem Sterling. Is he past his best?
Look, there's been some suggestion that he's been played out of position. Some people who were at the Chelsea games recently have suggested that Graham Potter's played him as a wing-back. Graham Potter came out a week ago and said he's certainly not playing at wing-back. I played that position myself, and he's certainly not playing there. He's playing on the right of the 3 for Chelsea. But 3 goals in 12 games in a top side that creates chances. He doesn't look happy there. He doesn't look like the player he was at Manchester City. And it's very rare as well, historically, under Pep Guardiola, that he makes a judgment on a player that proves to be accurate. And I think he looks at Raheem Sterling and said, we've had 5 or 6 good years out of him, now it's time to move on. Maybe at the age of 27 he's past his peak.
So Saka would fulfil that role? Because, I mean, he came in and made a huge impact.
Will start.
You do?
I think he'll start because, again, it goes back to what we were saying about Southgate. Sterling has delivered for England. 74 caps. 79 caps, 19 goals. I mean, if you compare it to Grealish, 1 goal in 24. Yes, OK, Grealish hasn't started all that games, but Sterling is somebody Southgate has been able to rely upon over the last 5 years, and so he's going to stick by him.
And he's relied, of course, on Harry Kane as a captain, and they are very much a sort of duo in this.
Yeah, you can't just keep bringing in form players who've just had a good start to the season. Maddison would be the exception because he's been so good. But you're looking at fostering a team ethic. Gareth Southgate remembers in the early 2000s when caps were given out like confetti by Sven-Göran Eriksson. He was on the periphery of that squad. He sat in the canteen when all the Liverpool players sat on one table. The Man United players sat on another table. The Chelsea players, the Arsenal players, Alan Shearer and all his mates on another table. He wants the team ethic to be strong.
Proper squad.
That's what you need in tournament football. And Gareth Southgate knows that from the perils of seeing that as a player.
And you think a big turnover when we get to 60 minutes or 70 minutes that there'll be a
depends on the result. I mean, listen, you'd like to think...
Here we go. We've got Gareth Southgate coming in, dressed fairly casually. Let's have a listen in to see what he's got to say.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to St George's Park for this England Media Conference for the World Cup squad announcement. As you can see, we've got Gareth Southgate with us, so we'll get started straight away with Rob Dorsett from Sky Sports News.
Gareth, nice to see you on a big day. A day when you've broken some hearts and you've made a number of players' dreams come true, I suspect. But crucially, before we get into the individuals and the decisions that you've made, when you look at that squad of 26, do you believe it has everything in there needed to win a World Cup?
Yeah, that we've wanted to make sure we've got the balance of the squad right. I think in this day and age, squad is more important than ever. We're now 5 substitutes. You can have almost half the team changed during a game. So you want different options for different moments of matches and for different stages of the tournament as well. We've obviously had to cover a couple of players that aren't yet fully match fit as well. So having 26 available meant that we were probably able to take a couple of risks that you might not have been able to with 23. But we think the balance is there, and we've got cover in the positions we need. We're lighter on depth in some positions than other in our country, but we think we've got everything covered.
We said widely across every bit of the media, I think, before you picked your squad, that James Maddison would be the headline story, whether he was in or whether he was out. He's in. Why is he in?
He's playing really well. Look, he's a good player. We've always said he's a good player. He's earned the right. We think he can give us something slightly different to the other attacking players that we've got. So I think at various stages there have been conversations, debates about James. There's been moments where, ahead of the Euros, I don't think he was in contention. He had a bit of a problem with his hip, and then I think September was probably a fair debate. But I think he's playing as well as any of the attacking players in this country. And, he is a little bit different to the others. We've got different types of threat, and I think we could need that.
Did you speak personally to Callum Wilson? Was he absolutely delighted?
I haven't had a chance with Callum. I did speak to James because I think this morning there was a lot of speculation that James wouldn't be with us. And we'd decided a couple of weeks ago that we would, but we weren't obviously going to go and tell him then. I didn't get a chance to speak with Callum. My priority always on these days is the difficult conversations and the sad news, and that is really tough. There's not many situations in football harder than that. Maybe releasing a young player at the early stages of their career, but the nature of those conversations, good and bad, reminds you of how much it means to a player to go to a World Cup. And I'm very conscious of that. So it is a great day, but also for some I've had to disappoint them.
One of those is Tammy Abraham, I suspect, and you've gone for Wilson ahead of Tammy Abraham. What was that discussion and debate like in your mind?
Yeah, look, Tammy's had a poor run of scoring form at the wrong time, really, and it's not a case where we're 3-4 weeks away from a finals and the start of the first match. We're now 10 days, and so form could be more important. I think we don't really know any of the players. We're watching their club form, but we don't really know where they are until we see them face to face, until we see them on the training pitch. We get regular medical updates from all their clubs, but there'll be medical issues that we're not completely aware of yet. We know the form we're seeing in the matches, but even so, you still don't get the full picture from the players until you're able to speak with them, work with them, and see how they train with each other.
You hinted that you wanted extra cover for players that might be struggling with injury, and obviously Calvin Phillips and Kyle Walker are the two obvious ones there. How are they? How big a gamble is it to include them in this squad? And can we assume that neither can really play a part in the opening game?
No, that's not the case. I mean, Calvin played last night, so I think with him, he's free of injury. We are aware that he's not going to be able to play 90 minutes. That won't be possible. We're going to have to build his fitness level, but he's available. He's free of injury, and we don't really have, we have Declan Rice as a defensive midfielder. Hendo can play there, but it's not his number one position. So we don't have a lot of cover for that role in the country. And Calvin is a super player, and we feel that that's a risk worth taking, because he's also generally his fitness is good, and we think he can add to the group.
And Kyle similarly?
Kyle a little bit different in that he's not back in full training yet, but he's going to be available before the end of the group stage. And of course we had to make a very difficult call with Reece, who we think is a fantastic player, but he wasn't going to be available until, if everything went perfectly, until the latter stages of the tournament. And there were too many unknowns for us on that road to recovery. And also I don't think we can take a player who's not available for the group. That would be deemed arrogant in some circles. But also we'd then be dropping, if everything went well and he was available and he was ready and we were picking him, then you'd be dropping him into a quarter-final after 8 weeks out, and that would be really demanding. So, yeah, tough call. Kyle is a long way ahead of that and is progressing really well.
Thank you. Carrie?
Hello, Gareth. Can we look at Harry Maguire, a player that's struggling to get minutes but has been a stalwart for you? What was your decision-making process, and how much have you been in touch with Manchester United about what he's doing when he's not getting those playing minutes? And will you be considering him as an out-and-out attacker after his playing time alongside Ronaldo against Real Sociedad?
Well, physically, we've had really good communication with all of the clubs in this period on the training loads of all of the players, because we've got to pick that up immediately on, it'll be Wednesday before we see them on the training pitch. So we needed to know those who are playing, what's their load, those who are playing less regularly. Some have had an unbelievably intense schedule, some have had less so. So we're picking up various fitness levels, and we've got to get that right on the training pitch. We've picked our more experienced defenders, and we think that at this moment in time the younger ones have got some really good qualities, but we don't think they've quite done enough to push the more experienced ones out. And we think the tournament we're going into and the level of the matches, that needed to be the pecking order.
You've always said that Trent Alexander-Arnold is an outstanding player, always in consideration, but he didn't start in the games building up to this announcement. What conversations did you have with him, and what's been his reaction that he is now in the squad?
No, as I said, really the only phone calls I've made have been to the two lads that are coming back from injury, the boys I left out of the squad, and then to James, because I felt that was an important call to make this morning. The rest of the guys, there's only so many hours in the day, and we've been monitoring fitness, monitoring matches, dealing with so much. So I think they'll be delighted, they'll get the news, and we've got plenty of time to chat over the next few weeks.
And for you now, going forward, when you've got a real balance between the experience of the players, the 12 that have been to a World Cup before, and the rest of this squad, and this quick turnaround, is that exactly why you've brought the likes of Harry Maguire back in when they haven't had those match minutes?
Yeah, he's one of our best centre-backs. So I think we know within the squad we've got a lot of players that we know have been to tournaments, have performed at the level, know what's required. We've got other players who are playing well, who are in form right at this moment, and we've got to balance all of that when we're picking our team.
You didn't call up James Maddison in the last camp, hasn't played for a few years now for England. A lot of people would have assumed that's because one of the camps he missed because he was ill and then was seen in a casino watching the match. You said at the time, well, that would just remind him of the scrutiny of being an England player. Did you have a conversation about that again, or on his form, is it just unnecessary?
No, I didn't have... Look, that was unfortunate from his perspective in that it became a bigger issue than it was for me because of, you end up in the papers, nobody likes that. I live with it every day, so I don't take any notice of it. But for me, that wasn't the drama that it seemed to be for everybody else. He's always been up against some really good players in that area of the pitch, and there's been moments where we were playing 4-3-3, no number 10 type profile, and that didn't necessarily fit. But he's, as I said earlier, he's playing exceptionally well. We like the fact that he finds those pockets of space, he gets turned, he plays forward. Not enough players play forward in this day and age. And of course, his set play delivery is outstanding. And he can score goals from distance, which against low block defences is another attribute that is a little bit different to some of our other players.
Thanks, Kerry. We'll go to John Murray from the BBC.
Hiya, Gareth. You got me? Yeah. Can you give us a flavour of what James Maddison's reaction was when he answered and you told him the news?
Yeah, he was delighted, and as I said, I had some very difficult calls that were emotionally at the other end of the spectrum. So, yeah, it was nice to give myself a little bit of an enjoyable end to that, because I'm excited about going to a World Cup. It's my fourth, and that's a privilege and an honour. And all of those calls, the difficult ones and the really enjoyable ones, were a reminder of what it means to the players.
And what would you say this 26 that you've chosen this time has got that makes it stand out from the other two big squads you've picked for the World Cup and the Euros?
Well, I think they've all been good squads. I mean, in 2018 we were at the start of something where we hadn't won a knockout game for 10 years, and there was a little bit less experience perhaps within the group of big matches. I think this is similar in terms of its standing to the group that went to the Euros, and yeah, of course, within that period of time from the start to the end of that, some players have moved on age-wise, some players haven't progressed in the way they might have done. New players, young players have emerged that have given us great competition for places in most areas of the pitch. So we're excited by the group. We think there's a lot of exciting talent within it, but the whole group have got to come together. There's a lot of challenges. It's a unique situation for everybody, this tournament, the timing of it, and the obstacles just to get to this point medically as much as anything. So we've got to adapt better than everybody else in this coming period.
Thanks.
Go to Jennifer from.
Hi, Gareth. Have the FA and the players come to a collective decision about what you will do or say if members from the LGBTQ plus community are victimised in any way during this particular World Cup? And as a follow-up question, Iran is your first match at this competition. They have been supplying the likes of Russia with weaponry. Should they be at this World Cup?
So regarding the LGBT community, we stand for inclusivity, and we're very, very strong on that. We think that's important in terms of all our supporters, and we understand the challenges that this tournament brings within that. If it wasn't for the strength of that community, we wouldn't be women's European champions. So it's very, very important to us. With Iran, that's a political situation that I don't know enough about to be able to comment. So those decisions have to be taken by governing bodies, and yeah, I can't comment with enough authority to give you a really considered view.
FIFA have asked that nations don't talk about anything other than football when the football starts. Will you be going along with that?
I think that's highly unlikely. I think we have always spoken about issues that we think should be talked about, particularly the ones we feel we can affect. I think, contrary to one or two observations in the last few weeks, we have spoken in the same way that other nations have spoken about this tournament and the human rights challenges. We've been very clear on our standpoint on that. I think we would also like to focus primarily on the football. This is for every player and every coach and everybody travelling to a World Cup. This is a carnival of football. It's the thing you work for your whole life. So you don't want that to be diminished by everything else that's going on around it currently. But we recognise that we are going to be in that situation, and we've got to accept and deal with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go to Oliver Kay.
You spoke about being lighter in depth in some positions than in others. Is it fair to say that midfield is one of those, and is it a disappointment that you haven't had a lot of young midfielders or midfielders of any type emerging as real strong candidates for this squad?
Well, to be fair, Jude has obviously emerged more in the last 2 years or 18 months since the Euros. I mean, we put him in at 17, 18. So, but look, everybody says we've got enormous depth, but we're 31% of the league last year. So I know I talked about that periodically 3-4 years ago. I think because the team have done well, that has masked that we've only got 4 English goalkeepers playing in the Premier League currently. Left backs, there aren't many playing. We've got an unbelievable injury list of fullbacks at the moment, left and right, quite incredible. And yeah, sort of number 6, if you like, defensive pivot midfield player, is also light in terms of actually developing that position in our country. So, Declan is really a converted defender, and Calvin is sort of slightly converted as well. So, we haven't produced that type of player for a long time, and it's something that our academies, I think could focus on. But that's for the longer term. We've got the players we've got. We're happy with the squad we've got. We always have to find a way of playing to the best attributes of the players we've got, and we can be exciting and dangerous, even though we don't have those types of profile of players.
And Antonio Conte was saying last night that Harry Kane is tired, exhausted.
I'm sure he is. Yeah.
Is that a concern for you? Not particularly with Harry, but with all the players that a lot of them do look tired or are carrying injuries.
Yeah. Look, again, I think I've stood here several times in the last year and said this World Cup. Everybody said this World Cup being in the middle of the season would be better for us, and I said we would lose players. Sadly, that has been the case. The schedule is what it is, but we've got to refresh the players. We've got to excite them when they get through the door. We've got a period of time where we won't set foot on the training pitch when they arrive because we'll travel on Tuesday. So we have got some that need to train, and we've got some that will benefit from a few days of doing nothing but get excited about playing for England, frankly. So we can only manage that when the players are with us. We understand the challenges for the clubs now and after the tournament, and we've just got to make sure we focus on the bits we can control.
Thank you. Take one there.
What have you learnt from the Euros that you can take into the World Cup? And why did you decide not to select James Ward-Prowse?
Yeah, with James, he's really competing profile-wise with Bellingham and Henderson, maybe to a lesser degree Gallagher. I don't see him in the same profile as Rice or Phillips. They're different types of players. He's just behind those guys, frankly, and it's as simple as that. Now, we've still got another round of games to get through, so I've spoken with a few of the players to say that things can still change over the weekend. From the Euros, there's loads of things we've learned, loads of things we did right, loads of things that actually won't apply in this tournament because it's a different time of the year, it's more condensed, we don't have warm-up games. We're going to be playing in different conditions, heat-wise. So you're always learning from every tournament, but also there are unique things around every tournament as well. And we've got to make sure that we weave all of that together.
And have you spoken to Ben White? His inclusion?
No, the only people I've spoken to are the ones I've already mentioned, but I would imagine, I hope he's very excited about being involved.
Thank you. Go to James Ollie from ESPN.
Hi, Gareth. Just following on from what you just said there, could you give us a bit more detail about the standby? Is there a sort of a formal standby list?
No, we had to name basically every English player that was available on a long list. There are some conversations I've had with players in the last couple of days where clearly they're going to be the next ones in their positions. But then we just don't know what might happen in the next few days. You know, I think there are 2 left-backs that got injured last night, for example. So we've got to be fluid, adaptable and ready for anything, really.
Just on that.
OK, this is the news conference with Gareth Southgate, the England manager, outlining the squad for the World Cup in Qatar. 26 players going. It's an interesting list. Aidan McGee is with us, who's been working with his ballpoint and his piece of paper to work out who's going where. Interesting that he said we've had to cover a couple of players aren't fully fit, so having 26 available meant we were able to take a couple of risks. Should an England manager be taking any risk going to a World Cup?
It depends how much you believe in the players. He clearly believes in Calvin Phillips. He did a great job for him during the delayed Euro 2020 campaign. No, he's not played much football this season, although he did play last night. But he thinks the risk is worth taking. But he did caveat that by saying they're going to have to build up his fitness. So he's not going to be able to play 7 games of 90 minutes. Now, let's be honest, that's wishful thinking. You're not going to play 7 games unless you get to the final.
Yeah.
As regards Kyle Walker, yeah, that's a risk as well. But again, tried and tested. He's not let him down at this level. Whether he's match fit enough remains to be seen. But I think he's banking on the first game against Iran not being too difficult.
Right.
So that's what we think. He can't say that, but that's probably what we're thinking.
Yeah.
But he's opted for balance. And the question was asked about Harry Maguire as well.
Yeah, and several on social media. Harry Maguire, question mark, question mark, question mark.
Again, a player who has delivered for him in the past. And you need the fulcrum of those players, of your squad, to be players who've been there before. You can't. That's why Maddison is a risk, because he hasn't played for England for 3 years. He's certainly not played. He's got 1 cap. So so
you've not been part of all the sort of
even
the practice and
even Callum Wilson's only got 4 caps.
Yeah, and Rashford's not played with them for.
Rashford's another one. Yeah. No one's actually mentioned. I mean, I thought Rashford was actually pretty fortunate to be in the squad last time round for Euro 2020, which obviously played a year later in Euro 2021. He's not exactly set the house on fire at Old Trafford in the time since. Some say that he's been beset by not problems off the pitch, but distractions off the pitch, which we kind of know about, rightly or wrongly.
School dinners,
exactly.
And the rest of it.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. But 4 goals in 13 games this season, to me, that's not exactly rip-roaring form that would get him in the squad. But again, he would probably say, look, he's got the experience, he's got the caps, he's been around squads before, that's got to count for something.
Yeah. Interesting when he was giving an indication about how you put this together as England manager. 10 days from the start, so form important. However, we don't know where they are until we get them on the training pitch. We don't get a full picture until we've talked to the players. Now, one might have imagined that they knew exactly where everyone was in terms of fitness and ability before being chosen. But clearly there is still a bit of a gamble about this for an England.
I'll tell you why it's a gamble, because there's a full round of Premier League matches this weekend. Now, there was an agreement made, I believe, I'm told, my sources tell me at the start of the season, an agreement was made that the Premier League fixtures immediately preceding the World Cup, the start of the World Cup, were not going to be high-octane, top 6 clashes. They're going to be kind of, Arsenal playing Wolves, for example. It's not necessarily like a top-of-the-table clash. However, it's all very well saying that and agreeing that. Arsenal will consider that a massive game. It's an absolutely huge game, and they've got players in the squad.
And it's those clubs that pay their wages.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is the thing. I mean, it's all very well saying, OK, Liverpool aren't going to be playing Man United or anything like that, but all these games are important for different reasons. I mean, how important is Conor Cody playing for Everton? this weekend. You know, they're on a bad run of form. They're under pressure to get a result. It's as simple as that. So there could be 2 more injuries this weekend or 3 more. It's happened before.
And throw everything into.
And there's no standby list as well, Mark. That's the other thing.
It's this 26 and that's it. Right.
No, he can call other players in.
We can't let you go without unveiling the Aidan McGee crystal ball.
Yeah.
How far are they going to get?
I think they're at the moment, given that they've not won a game in 6, there are some untested players here. No great surprises for me of the admissions. It's probably the squad I would have picked.
Right.
So I should have had my crystal ball out last night, really, shouldn't I? But I couldn't find it.
Quarterfinals?
I'd say quarterfinals, yeah.
Yeah. And who's going to win the World Cup?
I think it's difficult to see past Brazil right now.
Brazil.
And the pressure's on them. They've not done anything for 20 years. So the pressure's on them a little bit, but they've got some good players peaking at the right time. We talk about the conditions. It maybe might.
They'll enjoy the heat, won't they?
Yeah, but England are getting closer. Don't write them off. I think if anything can happen when you get out of the group.
Excellent. Aidan, thank you very much indeed.
Cheers,
and
Mark,
we'll see what happens, of course, out in Qatar. And just to update you that Paul, our correspondent, will be out there to update us on all the action. Now, Matt Hancock has got into the jungle and I'm a Celebrity last night with fellow contestant Sean Walsh as well, taking part in his first Bush Tucker trial. Crawling through a dark tunnel with lots of creepy crawlies. Sounds a bit like politics, doesn't it? In order to win meals for the camp, when he finally arrived at the main camp with the other contestants, didn't exactly receive a warm welcome. ITV News presenter Charlene White grilling him about entering the show and asking him if he understood that people wouldn't be very happy about him taking part while Parliament was still sitting. Boy George saying it was difficult to have him in the jungle as his mum had been in hospital during the pandemic. Let's now talk to former Conservative MP Edwina Currie, joining us with the hat and very good at... Look, it still fits.
It does.
There we go. He will have been obviously steeling himself for this and all the reaction, but does he perhaps realise quite how upset many people are here back at home?
He hasn't a clue. He absolutely hasn't a clue. I almost felt sorry for him last night because naivety was oozing out of every pore. And frankly, I think he's an idiot. The critics who say you've got a job and you should be back in the constituency and you should be back in Parliament are quite right. The critics who say you want to talk about dyslexia, which he has suffered from for many years, fine. There's the House of Commons. That's what it's for. And the idea that he can just kind of swan in and be nice and be himself, whatever that means, and that everyone's just going to buy it. Load of nonsense. He's going to have a very, very hard time.
Yeah. Is this actually, with a bit of a social experiment, these reality shows sometimes, that you go on this journey of self-discovery and self-awareness? What do you think he'll discover about himself?
Well, this is the 22nd series, and if you haven't watched any of them before, not watched them all the way through, then you go into this with your eyes shut, and that's just a stupid thing to do. Everybody that goes in, let's be fairly clear about this, everybody that goes in for 2 reasons. They go in to try and improve their career prospects one way or another. Yep. And they also they get a lot of money. And this year, apparently, the pay bill is about twice the usual figure. And that's how they've got strange people like Boy George, who seems to be moaning about just about everything, as well as Matt Hancock. Now, those are perfectly good reasons in a capitalist free society for somebody to go and do a reality TV show. And if you go in with your eyes wide open and you go in and you try to enjoy yourself, which is what I did, then you may well have a good time. But he's not in that situation at all. And for him, I think it's an absolute no-no. But it's television. Oh, my God.
Right. So a calculated move by him that maybe his political career was over and he had to cash in, or is that being a bit too cruel?
He's 44 years old. I mean, he could stay in Parliament for another 20 years and do all sorts of wonderful stuff. And it's a mistake to think that you're only a success in the House of Commons if you are a senior minister. You can do all sorts of other things. When I came out, when I stopped being a minister over eggs, as you will remember, I got involved in really helping in my constituency. I helped to bring Toyota to this country, to my patch. I got involved in things I'd never thought about before. And I'm very proud of the work that I was able to do as a back then, having the freedom to decide what to do. I wrote loads and loads of books. I made lots of money out of my books, myself up for the rest of my life. Now, there's loads of options. And he worked for the Bank of England. I mean, he could go and be quite senior in the Bank of England. Goodness knows they need some brains. He's a very bright man.
Yeah.
Going into the job is the worst possible decision he could have taken.
Right. I think the Bank of England may have other problems at the moment. However, we are being told that there are MPs joining various WhatsApp groups at Westminster to actually vote. Would you be voting to actually get him to undergo some of these trials?
I'm deeply tempted. What you have to do is download the I'm a Celebrity app onto your phone, and then you get 5 free votes. And yes, I've heard as well that people in the Lords and in the Commons on all sides, including his colleagues, are downloading this so that they can vote for him to continue to do a lot of this. But the fact is that 1 million people will vote for Matt Hancock to do every disgusting thing on the planet. And if he does it seriously, you know, he might win a few fans. Well, he might win a few fans back, because I was a fan of his as to how he conducted himself during the pandemic. But no, the public at large are determined to have their revenge on somebody who set up sorts of draconian rules during the pandemic and then was caught breaking them. No.
Yeah. Edwina, and your hat, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's been great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Now, let's stay with politics, but the serious stuff. The eagerly awaited autumn statement arriving next Thursday. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt expected to outline up to £60 billion in spending cuts and tax rises. Well, Gloria has been sitting down with an exclusive interview with former Chancellor Philip Hammond to get his view on that upcoming statement.
So, first of all, you know, why do we have to balance the books? Because for years now, we've avoided this issue by borrowing. When I was Chancellor, my opposite number was John McDonnell, who had a massive plan for more borrowing. Liz Truss had a plan for borrowing to fund tax cuts. The markets have now effectively told the British government, whoever's running it, enough with the borrowing. You've now got to balance the books. And that means as the population gets older, and it's getting sharply older during the 2020s, we either have to pay more taxes or we have to cut our public services and shape them differently or fund them differently. So if you want to maintain the same level of public services, there will have to be more tax revenue raised. Now, of course, it's tempting to think, well, that's fine, so long as someone else pays the taxes. As it happens, I am broadly in favour of a windfall tax, so long as it's sensibly structured and only tackles the genuinely windfall element, not the cyclical ups and downs that you get in energy markets, because energy companies plan around those cycles of lower profits and higher profits over different periods of years. But where genuine windfalls are earned, I think it is legitimate to tax them. And actually, I'd be quite surprised if Jeremy Hunt doesn't move further on some kind of a windfall tax when he announces his autumn statement.
Can we, as a nation, afford to keep the pension triple lock? And can we afford, some people would say we can't not afford to do it, to increase benefits in line with prices?
Well, first of all, I expect that Jeremy Hunt's judgment in this statement will be that we have to go ahead with both maintaining the triple lock and the uprating in line with inflation, just because of the huge pressure that people on low incomes are under from rising prices and high inflation. But I do think in the longer run, there are two issues. One is around pensions. Is it really right that we should always uprate by the highest of wages, prices, or 2%? And I think that is quite difficult to justify, and not all pensioners are poor. So I think there is a case for looking again at the way we treat pensioners, and possibly for distinguishing the poorest pensioners from the great body of pensioners, some of whom are really quite comfortably off.
Philip Hammond. And you can watch Gloria's full interview with the former Chancellor tomorrow at 3:30 here on GB News in The Briefing with Alistair Stewart. Now, it's only a day since the new season of The Crown being released by Netflix, covering one of the royal family's most turbulent decades, of course, the 1990s, featuring 3 marriage breakups, including Princess Diana and Sarah Ferguson, the fire at Windsor Castle, and, of course, Princess Diana's 54-minute panorama bombshell interview with Martin Bashir, all featured in this season, with her speaking about her husband's affair and, of course, the events with Army officer James Hewitt as well, all controversial stuff. Well, joining us now, former BBC royal correspondent and royal commentator Jenny Bond, who was there when the real stuff happened. And Jenny, as I was asking Nick Owen yesterday, surely the real thing was dramatic enough that they hadn't really got to make up storylines on this.
Absolutely. That's what I've said throughout. I mean, if you had been there during the 90s, as close as Nick and I were, as close as probably any outsider could be to what was going on, you would know that you couldn't make it up. And that's what we often said to one another. My gosh, you could not make this up. Summoned into the office at 5 a.m. because Fergie's been found with her toes being sucked by a financial advisor. The sordid tapes that were released both between Camilla and Charles and between Diana and an alleged lover, James Gilby. I mean, it was dramatic enough, which is why I don't understand why Peter Morgan has felt he has to invent things and elaborate and actually distort the truth.
Obviously, there is dramatic licence always enjoyed in these things, and I've only watched the first one in the of the episodes, and clearly he's trying to engineer a situation where the Queen, where she builds up to that annus horribilis, is trying to cope with all things that are being thrown at her. Do you believe it was the right thing to screen this so soon after her death?
No, I think it's insensitive. I think the subject matter of this series and the following series are too insensitive to be dramatised on television. I mean, I cannot imagine what William and Harry will be feeling when, in the next series, the death of their mother, the traumatic, sudden and traumatising death of their mother, is replayed on television, in fiction, for the enjoyment of millions of people around the world. It's unthinkable, and I think it's cruel.
Obviously, a lot of money spent, very high production levels, but I must admit, I almost burst out laughing sometimes when it got quite comical and sort of visions of Harry Enfield in The Windsors, which was a comedy programme.
Well, no, I'm not actually knocking the standards of the programme. It is so professional, so glossy, so wonderful, with fantastic acting. And therein lies the problem, I think. People are believing it, particularly the younger generation. I mean, people say it's absolutely patronising to suggest they don't understand that this is fiction. Well, I'm sorry, but quite a few people that I've met, young people, my daughter's sort of age in their 30s, who've known the job I've done for 30 years and haven't been particularly interested, suddenly are riveted by The Crown and come up to me and say, "Oh, I didn't know that happened." And I said, "Well, no, it didn't. Or at least part of it might have happened, but it actually wasn't like that." So it's fairly dangerous and damaging territory, and would have been so hurtful to the Queen had she still been alive, particularly a made-up conversation in which Charles told his mother, allegedly and pure fiction, that if we were an ordinary family, then social services would be called in. I mean, that's really hurtful.
What did you make of Imelda Staunton's depiction of the Queen, a new Queen for this particular series?
A fine actress, obviously. I don't think she's quite captured the Queen, though. I think Claire Foy was brilliant in the first series or two. But, I mean, it's a difficult act to depict someone who, when she was doing it, was still alive. But obviously, the acting standards are fabulous. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't enjoy the first few series. I did. I just think now it's too close to the knuckle. It's like picking at a scab, which is just about covering a deep, deep wound, which is the trauma of the 90s, the ugly breakup of a marriage between Charles and Diana, and then her death. It's really unsavoury, I think.
Yeah, obviously, the family was deeply hurt by a lot of those events. Jenny, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your reaction, and of course, we'll be watching again, no matter what we think of the series, of course. Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's return to that breaking news we've had in this hour. The England manager, Gareth Southgate, with a 26-man squad for the World Cup in Qatar. It's quite a big squad going. In detail, we've got Jordan Pickford, Nick Pope and Aaron Ramsdale, the three goalkeepers. But injuries for Chelsea defenders Reece James and Ben Chilwell, meaning an opportunity for Liverpool's Trent Alexander-Arnold and Ben White of Arsenal returning to the squad. Kyle Walker in, despite his injury problems. Similar situation for Man City teammate Calvin Phillips, getting a chance with Leicester's James Maddison. Yes, he is in. A surprise call-up for Crystal Palace midfielder Conor Gallagher. And Newcastle's forward Callum Wilson preferred as a support role for Harry Kane up front. Harry captain as expected. No place for Brentford's in-form striker Ivan Toney or Tammy Abrahams of Roma. So those are the details. Coming up, we've got your views on all the strikes going on, the public sector and the NHS. Mark, first of all, saying the public sector workers are now, if not always, enemies of the state and therefore the people. Blimey. Alan saying, I spent 15 hours waiting in Peterborough A&E with my wife yesterday. I took a long look at our NHS, noticed lots of staff roaming about with no management supervision. Conclusion, the NHS not fit for purpose. We hope you've recovered. Keep your views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Thanks for being with us. And Patrick coming up next with all the latest, including reaction, of course, to those strikes and the footy. We'll be back on Monday at 12. Join us then.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Tomorrow will be fairly similar to today. Again, very, very mild, quite blustery. Most places dry but cloudy. Why is the weather so mild at the moment? Well, track the isobars all the way down to the southwest. That is where our air is coming from, bringing warmth but also bringing a lot of cloud. And particularly close to this weather front, a lot of rain. We actually have a Met Office yellow warning in place. Persistent heavy rain, especially for Skye, other parts of the Highlands, though that rain really building up through the next 24 hours or so could cause some problems. The rain at times affecting maybe central Scotland, perhaps for a time for Northern Ireland. Drizzle at times for western parts of England and Wales, but many places away from the northwest dry. But look at these overnight temperatures, incredibly mild, above the average maximum for this time of year. It will be windy and particularly gusty for a time on Friday across southeast Scotland, so we have another Met Office yellow warning here. Still some drizzle at times around Western Hills. The rain pushing back towards Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland during Friday afternoon, perhaps easing in the far northwest. Again, elsewhere, most places dry and again exceptionally mild, 17, 18 Celsius. Could see a little bit more in the way of brightness across East Anglia and the southeast through Friday afternoon. That rain continues to slip south as we head through Friday night and into Saturday, but kind of grinds to a halt across the far north of England.